Jaime Lannister stood at the edge of the ruined throne room, light from the narrow windows falling in pale rays across shards of shattered marble and puddles of congealed blood. The Iron Throne, massive and cold, rose before him in all its jagged glory, yet it looked smaller than he remembered, diminished by the countless nights he had envisioned it, despised it, and fought for it, all without quite knowing if he truly believed it was worth the price. But there it was, in the middle of a throne room haunted by ghosts and echoes of war. He could still smell the lingering tang of wildfire, the acrid memory of a siege that felt both ancient and fresh. He took a careful step forward, armor clinking in the hush, half expecting an arrow to fly out of some hidden corner or a sword to sweep toward his throat. Yet no one emerged to challenge him. The battle was finished, and he was, indeed, the last man standing. He bent his head, thinking of Cersei and Tyrion, of the father he had once feared more than the gods themselves, and of every choice that had led him here. Who would have thought Jaime Lannister, a man known for a single, treacherous thrust of the sword, would ever become king? That he would survive all the cunning lords, the hungry queens, and even those who bore dragons upon their banners? Kings and queens had risen and fallen as though carried on a tide of endless bloodshed, and yet he remained. The man who had once slayed a mad monarch for the realm's sake now found himself drawn to that austere seat of power. His knees felt weak. He remembered what it was to bow before a king, before Robert Baratheon, before Joffrey and Tommen and the Targaryen girl who had soared across the skies on a monstrous beast. He remembered the rustle of banners, the clang of steel, the harsh cries of despair. How many had died for this? How many had died so that he, Jaime Lannister, might walk toward the Iron Throne, unopposed, to place a crown upon his own head? He had no illusions that this was some grand triumph. Rather, it felt like the final link in a chain he had carried all his life, the shackles of fate closing with a silent snap. He walked across the ruined floor, boots slipping across sticky patches of dried blood, and set his hand upon the throne's cold metal. Once he had sat upon it after killing Aerys Targaryen in a moment of sardonic victory. But he had been young, proud, and brimming with a confused defiance. Now he was older and more tired than he dared to admit. His sword arm ached. The gold of his right hand reflected faint light in chipped, tarnished brilliance. He had lost his real sword hand years ago, a sacrifice that still pained his soul more than his flesh. There had been a time he thought that loss would define him, but it had merely begun the process that changed him forever. He eased himself onto the cold seat. The metal poked at him, edges biting into his legs through the cracks in his armor, but he made no sound. A hiss of breath escaped his lips. That was it. The act was simpler than he had ever dreamed. With a sigh, he settled upon the throne and felt a weight as if the entire realm pressed upon his shoulders. Perhaps it did. Perhaps it always had. Around him, the throne room was silent. Sunlight speared the gloom, carving bright columns in the dust-filled air. "Is this who I am?" he murmured, voice echoing slightly. "King Jaime Lannister, who first killed a king and now becomes one?" The walls offered no response, but that was nothing new. He had always wrestled with silence. Silence in the corridors when people whispered behind his back. Silence around his sister in their final days together when he no longer recognized her. Silence in his heart when he realized there might be more to life than the rotted glories of House Lannister. Yet for all that, he still felt a stirring in his chest, a quiet, persistent hope that this might be a chance to do something right, for once. He closed his eyes. He did not need to see the throne room to recall the carnage that had led him here. Daenerys Targaryen, in her righteous fury, had scourged King's Landing with dragon flame, seeking to establish a final hold on the Seven Kingdoms. Cersei, in her madness, had refused to surrender, believing her cunning would outlast the Dragon Queen's might. The city had burned. Innocents had perished in the thousands. The Red Keep had trembled beneath the roars of Drogon, shrieking peasants, and the thunder of collapsing walls. He remembered running up the labyrinth of steps, searching for Cersei, his heart pounding in his chest. He remembered the unsullied dead on the steps, the lion banners torn and blackened. And in the end, he had found his sister, broken and half-buried in the crumbling dungeons beneath the keep. He had held her as she died, tears streaming unbidden down his cheeks. He had lived. She had not. Yet that was only the start of a longer, more bitter war. When Daenerys had turned her fury upon the realm, hearts had hardened against her. Tyrion had tried to mediate but lost his influence. The Northern Lords, the Riverlands, even some of her own advisors recoiled from the brand of conqueror she had revealed in her moment of wrath. There were betrayals, alliances, more battles, and in the end, Daenerys too was slain. A crossbow bolt from the shadows, an assassin who had vanished like a ghost. Some claimed it was Bron's doing, that the Sellsword-turned lord had grown disenchanted with dragonfire and illusions of grandeur. Others whispered that it was an agent of Dorne, seeking vengeance for old slights. No one knew for certain, and in the aftermath, Westeros had fallen into chaos again. The lords scrambled for power. Gendry Baratheon had risen briefly, only to be cast down. Sansa Stark had declared the North free and parted ways with the southern kingdoms, causing further fracturing. Aegon Targaryen, once Jon Snow had quietly abdicated, departing for the north as far as the rumors said. And the smallfolk continued to suffer. Through it all, Jaime had fought in battles he never wished to join, forging tenuous alliances to protect innocent lives where he could. The name Kingslayer became an uneasy talisman. Many still mistrusted him, for how could they not? But he pressed on, determined that if there was any shred of honor left in him, he would spend it in preserving what remained of the realm. The War of Many Kings, some called it. A handful of pretenders and claimants stepped forward, splintering the land. It was not as cataclysmic as Robert's Rebellion or the War of the Five Kings, perhaps, but it was heartbreak enough for anyone who remembered better days. Jaime survived them all. Not by cunning alone, he was not Tyrion, but by forging improbable friendships, honoring his word when possible, and defending the innocent rather than serving a thirst for glory. In the end, the final threat had come not from a living monarch, but from the lingering greed of men who desired to rule from the shadows. A conspiracy of lesser lords led by remnants of House Frye, House Bolton's scattered survivors, and a few other desperate houses had seized King's Landing, claiming the city in a savage coup. There, upon the battered walls of the capital, Jaime fought the last pitched battle, defending what was left of the city. The conspirators died or yielded. The Red Keep, half in ruin, became his to claim if he so wished. And he did not wish it, yet there was no alternative. The realm needed a figurehead who might hold it together, if only for a short time. With no one else left who commanded any shred of legitimacy and power, he was the eldest Lannister son still living. Jaime found himself alone before the Iron Throne, champion and conqueror and reluctant heir to the devastation. He inhaled a trembling breath, the metallic tang of iron filling his nostrils. The seat felt like a cage beneath him, but he did not rise. Instead, he pressed his gold hand against the throne's arm. "I never wanted this," he whispered. "But perhaps that is what might make me worthy in the end." Another hush followed. He bowed his head, remembering all those who had gone. And in that moment, he was not the man who had once pushed Bran Stark from a window. He was not the man who had been so assured in his arrogance and cruelty. He was simply Jaime, a knight who had sinned many times and yearned to atone just as often. The sound of shifting rubble snapped him from his reverie. He looked up to see Brienne of Tarth at the threshold of the ruined hall, limping slightly, her great sword scabbarded across her back. Her gaze flicked to him, and he saw relief mingled with sorrow in her eyes. She had fought beside him in the last days of the coup, each blow of her sword a testament to her unyielding sense of honor. Her armor was scorched and dented, and blood stained the leather around her right hip. But she remained unbroken, as tall and unmovable as a mountain. They had survived countless trials together, forging a bond that transcended old animosities. She strode closer, each step echoing, until she stopped before the Iron Throne. Her voice was rough with exhaustion. "The city is secure, Your Grace." He flinched at the title, but nodded. "And the people?" Her lips tightened. "More men died in the streets than we hoped. But some semblance of order has been restored. The small folk, some are returning to their homes. Others will never find them again. The Red Keep, it is half in rubble, my lord." His gaze drifted to the battered pillars and scorched tapestries. "We will rebuild it if we must," he said quietly. "And the lords, are they?" "Gone or surrendered," she replied. "All that remains is to claim the crown and proclaim peace." Her voice almost wavered. "If that is what you will do." He rose from the Iron Throne, each motion laden with a weariness that sank into his very bones. "I mean to try," he said. "If I do nothing else worth remembering, at least let me do this." Brienne regarded him in silence. There was something in her gaze that made him ache inside, an unspoken memory of their shared journey from the day she dragged him through the wilderness after the loss of his hand to the day she arrived here, unwavering in her loyalty. He had once mocked her mercilessly. He had spat at the idea of honor. Now, he owed what was left of his soul to her example. Finally, she inclined her head in a gesture of respect. "Then let me stand beside you, Jaime." She rarely used his name alone, but in that moment it felt like the only proper thing. He looked away, gathering himself. Then he forced his battered legs to carry him down the steps of the dais. When he reached her, he lifted his right arm, his golden hand, and placed it upon her shoulder. "I will be grateful for that. More than you know." She nodded wordlessly, and together they walked out of the throne room, the echoes of their footsteps following like phantoms. In the corridors, guards in dented armor saluted stiffly. Some were the remnants of the Lannister forces, others Sells-Words who had thrown their lot in with Jaime when the conspirators were driven out. But all wore the same bleak exhaustion, the same desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, the fighting was done. Jaime felt a pang. They looked at him not simply as their commander but as their king. It was a burden heavier than plate mail. They made their way through the labyrinth of fallen arches and across courtyards littered with debris. Smoke still curled from a section of the keep where wildfire caches had been ignited, albeit in a contained explosion. For the moment, it posed no new danger, thanks largely to Tyrion's old knowledge of the hidden stockpiles and Brienne's quick action in sealing the area. It seemed fitting somehow that the one thing Jaime had once used to define himself, the slaying of a mad king who would have burned them all, would remain a specter at his crowning. But unlike Aerys, Jaime resolved he would never threaten his people with wildfire. He would never let that madness take hold. If he was to be king, he would be one that the realm deserved, if not a good king, then at least a better one than all the tyrants and fools who had come before him. Within the half-ruined Great Hall, what remained of the noble lords, knights, and officials had gathered. Some clutched their bandaged arms or pressed cloths to bleeding wounds, but they still stood proud in the battered hall. Murmurs fell into silence as Jaime and Brienne stepped in. All eyes were upon him. He saw men and women wearing the colors of fallen houses, the sigils of families that had once been enemies or uncertain allies. They seemed wary, uncertain if he would order them executed or forgiven. For a long moment he took in their faces. Then, with deliberate calm, he said, "I claim the throne by right of conquest and necessity. But I do not wish to be a tyrant. We have all lost too much. Any man, any woman who will pledge loyalty to the peace I seek to establish is welcome here. I grant pardon for all acts committed in this war on both sides, so long as from this day forward you do not raise arms against the crown or the realm." The announcement rippled through the gathering. A few faces flashed with relief, others with skepticism. A stout lord with thinning hair and a bandaged cheek stepped forward, leaning on his sword. Jaime recognized him as Lord Humbert Craighall, one of the lesser Westermen who had once sworn fealty to House Lannister but had turned cloak more than once in recent months. "Your Grace," he said hesitantly, "we accept your pardon and we stand with you for the sake of peace." He knelt, bowing his head. One by one, others followed. Some gave half-hearted nods, but enough knelt that a hush of acceptance washed across the hall. Perhaps they were tired of fighting. Perhaps they saw that Jaime alone possessed the might and claimed to unify the realm. Or perhaps they simply feared the last Lannister lion, the storied Kingslayer now turned king. Regardless, they knelt, and Jaime felt a mixture of unease and a strange, deep resolve. If this was how things must be, then so be it. A shaky voice cut through the silence. Ser Davos Seaworth, the old smuggler knight, stepped forward from the shadowed side of the hall. He looked older than Jaime remembered, his hair more salt than pepper, his face lined with the sorrow of too many wars. "Your Grace," he said, voice carrying the husky accent of the storms. "You say you seek peace. You know as well as any that lords across the realm still hold grudges, that some new pretender may rise. How will you keep the realm united when even dragons fail to do so?" Jaime studied him. Ser Davos had advised Stannis Baratheon once, then served as hand to other claimants who had come and gone. A man who had lost kings but never lost his sense of duty. "I will do what I must," Jaime replied, voice calm but carrying. "I will rebuild what we can. I will punish those who defy the crown and threaten the innocent. And I will not pretend to be something I am not. I am no child of prophecy, no chosen conqueror. I am a knight who has done terrible things. But the realm does not need illusions anymore. We have had enough illusions to last 1,000 years. If peace requires a strong hand, so be it. If it requires mercy, I will offer it." Ser Davos inclined his head, seeming satisfied. "Then for the good of the realm, you have my support, Your Grace." He knelt as well, age stiffening his limbs. Jaime felt an odd pang of gratitude. The man had once loathed House Lannister, but here he was, bowing to Jaime's kingship for the sake of the people. It was the shape of things to come, Jaime realized. Old hatreds might be soothed if he led with a steady hand. There would be those who might never bow, who might wage war from hidden keeps, but for now he had a chance, slim, precious, and fragile, to bring peace to the realm. In the days that followed, the Red Keep became a hive of frenetic activity. Word spread through King's Landing that Jaime Lannister would ascend the throne. Wagons of food were brought in from the Crownlands to feed the refugees who had flocked back into the city, and Jaime commissioned repairs to the city walls and the most damaged districts. He walked among the people, flanked by Brienne and a handful of guards, witnessing the devastation firsthand. Children ran barefoot among broken cobblestones. The stench of burned flesh lingered in alleyways where dragonfire had once roared. He could not bring back the dead, nor undo the horrors, but he promised them that the fighting was over and relief was coming. Some spat at his feet. Others broke down in tears of relief. He did not flinch from either reaction. Every night he returned to his quarters, which were hardly more than a half-cleared chamber in a partially collapsed tower. He refused the opulent rooms that had once belonged to Cersei. He could not sleep surrounded by her memory. Instead, he dined simply with Brienne, Ser Davos, and a few other trusted advisors. They discussed the rebuilding, the question of who should serve on the new small council, and how best to handle the fractious lords who might see Jaime's coronation as an opportunity to rebel. Exhaustion weighed on him. His body was healing from the bruises and minor wounds of battle, but more than that, his soul was tired. Sometimes, late at night, he would pace the ramparts, trying to reconcile the quiet flicker of torchlight against the memory of raging flames and dying screams. He thought of Tyrion, wondering if his brother was still alive somewhere. The last he had heard, Tyrion had vanished shortly after Daenerys' death. Perhaps he was dead as well. The thought pained Jaime more than he dared admit. They had been close once, and even at their worst, there was a bond that nothing could fully sever. He thought of Sansa Stark in the north, who had declared independence. Would she send an envoy or an army? He doubted she wanted more war, but the wounds between the Starks and the Lannisters ran deep. He could only hope that time, or a steady diplomacy, might bridge that rift, or at least keep them from each other's throats. Days turned to weeks, and the city slowly, painstakingly began to heal. Craftsmen repaired the Red Keep's walls. Farmers from the Reach delivered wagons of grain under newly established trade agreements. Jaime held court in the throne room, though it remained partially damaged. He refused to let the hall be closed off. If he was to be king, he would face the realm openly, in the same place that had once witnessed the worst of his sins. He passed judgments on petty disputes, granted pardons, and demanded accountability from those who had turned to banditry in the chaos. To his surprise, men who had once been enemies stepped forward to help. Yohn Royce from the Vale, tall, flinty, and honorable, arrived in King's Landing with a small retinue, offering cautious support. The Vale had been relatively unscathed by the last wave of battles, but Lord Royce recognized that a stable capital was essential to avoid further bloodshed. From Dorne came a new princess, Arianne Martell's cousin, who approached with demands and guarded proposals. Dorne had grievances, as always, but was willing to treat with the Lannister king if it meant re-establishing trade routes and ensuring no Dragon Queen rose to scorch them anew. Jaime accepted them with the patience he was only now learning. He never had Tyrion's silver tongue, but he had come to appreciate the power of listening, truly listening to others. The day of the coronation arrived with little fanfare, less pomp than any king might have expected. But the realm was war-weary, and Jaime wanted no lavish spectacle while his people starved in broken homes. The ceremony took place in late afternoon, as the sun slanted through the high windows of the throne room. A single band of musicians played a somber rendition of the royal anthem. The High Septon, a gaunt man chosen more for survival than piety, placed a simple crown upon Jaime's head. It was a circlet of gold and iron, hastily forged from scraps found in the depths of the Red Keep, an apt symbol of the battered realm. Jaime knelt, bowed his head, and listened to the prayers for a just and merciful ruler. The crowd was small, a handful of lords, knights, and representatives of various factions. Brienne stood at his right, Ser Davos at his left. When he rose, the crown felt heavy, but he stood tall and faced the assembled witnesses. "I swear to defend the realm as best I can," he said, voice carrying through the hush. "I will uphold the peace, protect the innocent, and strive to be a better king than those who came before me." If there was a tremor in his voice, he hid it. He knew every eye measured him. A kingslayer to be king, an oathbreaker to uphold the realm. The gods must be laughing, but he stood there anyway, defiant and determined. Then, at a nod from the High Septon, applause rose, tentative but sincere enough. Some faces were grim, others intrigued. There was no roar of approval, no grand cheering throngs, But it was enough. For now it was enough. That night, alone in his new royal chambers, still half-furnished and missing a proper door in one section, Jaime gazed at his reflection in a polished mirror. The crown sat on the table, casting faint glimmers in the candlelight. He removed his golden hand and placed it beside the crown, regarding them both as two twisted symbols of his life. Once, he had boasted that he cared nothing for the opinions of men, that he was above their scorn, their moral judgments. Now he saw how deeply he had always cared, how every slur and glance had cut him. The difference was that he had learned to care about the fate of others, too, beyond the walls of House Lannister's pride. That was the hardest lesson he had ever learned. He heard a knock at the door, a gentle rap. "Enter," he said, his voice quiet. Brienne stepped in, still in her mail. Her blonde hair was disheveled, and fatigue etched lines around her mouth. A bruise darkened her left temple from an earlier scuffle with bandits who had tried to enter the city gates. Yet her eyes were unwavering. "Your Grace," she said, bowing slightly. He almost smiled. "We are past formalities, aren't we?" He gestured for her to step closer. "Please sit. I suspect you've not eaten." She shook her head. "I checked the guard rotations first. But I'll sit if you order me to." There was a faint glimmer of humor in her voice, though overshadowed by the seriousness of the day. "Then I order you sit." His tone carried gentleness. He drew out a chair, and she seated herself carefully. He followed suit, resting opposite her, arms folded. "The day has been long," he said, stating the obvious. She nodded. "Long indeed. But it is done. You are king, Jaime." She studied him carefully, as if still unsure if this reality was some dream. He let out a breath. "I'm not sure how to feel. I keep expecting someone to walk in and say there's another pretender with a better claim, or that the city's about to be attacked by the Golden Company again. Maybe tomorrow will bring some new threat. Perhaps," Brienne allowed, "but I have faith you'll face it." He met her gaze. "Why?" She paused, mouth slightly open. Then her broad shoulders shifted in a slight shrug. "Because I've seen what you can do when you choose honor. I've seen it in the quiet deeds, not the loud boasts. Because you stayed your hand when you could have spilled more blood. Because you saved me once when it would have been easier to let me die. And because, despite everything, you came back when the realm needed you even though it brought you nothing but loss." His chest tightened. He remembered the night near Harrenhal when he had risked his life to save her from a horrific fate. It felt like a lifetime ago. "That doesn't erase my sins." "No," she said softly, "it doesn't. But perhaps it means you can do better than those who never saw their own failures. And perhaps that is what the realm needs." He drew a shaky breath. The candlelight flickered over the planes of her face, and he remembered how once he had mocked her appearance. Now he found her more beautiful than any jewel-encrusted lady in a queen's gown. "I'll try," he said. "That's all I can promise." She reached across the table, her large, calloused hand covering his. "Then that is enough, Jaime." He nodded, his voice caught in his throat. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he cleared his throat, pulled his hand away gently. "You should rest. Tomorrow, we start the real work of building a council. I'll need a hand of the king. I'd ask you, but you'd refuse, wouldn't you?" Her lips twitched. "I'm a knight, not a politician. My place is with a sword in hand, defending you and the realm." He sighed. "I suspected as much. I'll find someone else to do the talking." A faint smile curved his lips. "Thank you, Brienne." She stood and inclined her head. "Your Grace," she said, a hint of warmth in her voice, and left. In the weeks that followed, Jaime formed his small council. Ser Davos he named Hand of the King, trusting the older man's wisdom and loyalty to the common folk. Davos initially resisted, calling himself unworthy, but Jaime insisted. Jon Royce became Master of Laws, while a son of the late Randall Tarley, a pragmatic man of quiet competence, took the post of Master of War. A maester from Old Town joined them as Grand Maester, a man whose name Jaime struggled to recall but who displayed a keen mind for healing and records. For Master of Coin, they courted a wealthy merchant from the Stormlands, since the crown's coffers were nearly empty and the Lannisters' legendary gold was mostly spent. The seat of Master of Whispers remained notably empty. No one wanted to tread in Varys' footsteps. But Jaime accepted that an intelligence network would be vital in the uncertain times. Perhaps, he mused, Bronn might fill that role if he ever resurfaced. A part of Jaime was wary about entrusting such a position to a mercurial Sellsword, But in the new realm, unusual solutions were sometimes necessary. Together, they set about the tedious work of reconstruction. Letters were sent across the realm, summoning lords to swear fealty or declare their intentions. A measured approach was taken with the Reach and the Westerlands, ensuring farmland could feed the Crownlands and the Riverlands. The Iron Islands remained a problem. Scattered and rebellious by nature, they refused to bend the knee without parley. Jaime knew the Ironborn too well. They respected only strength, so he prepared a small fleet and sent envoys, demanding an audience under threat of blockade. Brienne, ever by his side, captained Jaime's personal guard. The city watch was reformed, led by men who were loyal to the new king not for gold, but because they believed in peace. Slowly, King's Landing returned to a shadow of its former bustle. Markets reopened, wagons creaked over repaired bridges, and the reek of rot faded as mass graves were covered and new houses built from salvaged stone. Jaime walked those streets often. The people grew used to the sight of a tall, golden-haired man in partial armor, the stump of his right wrist fitted with a gilded hand. Children stopped to stare, not quite afraid but curious. He listened to their tales of hardship, how their fathers or mothers had been killed in the chaos. He offered words of solace where he could, and occasionally direct aid. It was not enough, never enough, but he did not shy from trying. And in the doing, he felt a flicker of something he barely recognized. Purpose. Still, shadows lingered. Not all the lords were content. Rumors reached him of plots brewing in the Westerlands among those who thought House Lannister should have a different scion upon the throne. Some distant cousin with purer ambition, perhaps. Others in the Reach muttered that a crippled king, widely known as an oathbreaker, could not lead them. Jaime read each raven's message with weary acceptance. He understood well that the crown was not a guarantee of loyalty, but that only spurred him to remain vigilant. One day, a band of Sellswords, calling themselves the Flaming Boars, tried to storm the city gates in a half-baked coup, believing the city was ripe for conquest. Jaime led the defense in person, mounting his horse and riding out with the newly reorganized city watch. The skirmish was brutal but brief. Jaime had not lost his prowess, even with the golden hand. He slew 2 men, guided his horse expertly, and commanded the lines to encircle the Sellswords. When the dust settled, the flaming boars lay in puddles of their own blood, and the survivors were clapped in irons. Jaime had the leaders executed for treason and spared the rest, sending them to labor in rebuilding the city walls. Such a display of mercy and firmness both silenced some of the grumblings. That evening, he returned to the keep, his armor streaked with gore. He dismounted heavily, nearly collapsing from the rush of pain in his ribs where one sword had slipped past his guard. Brienne rushed to his side, brow creased with worry. "You're hurt," he grimaced. "A scratch. Help me out of this armor." She did so, her fingers deftly working the buckles. His tunic was shredded, and a dark bruise covered his side. She pressed a hand gently, and he winced. "I'll fetch the maester," she said, voice clipped with concern. When she returned with the Grand Maester, Jaime submitted to the poking and prodding, trying not to curse too loudly. The old man smeared a foul-smelling ointment on the wound, then bandaged it carefully. "You'll live," the Maester said wryly. "Though if you keep leading charges, you might not remain so lucky." When the Maester left, Jaime lay back on the crude bed, exhaling in relief. Brienne hovered, uncertain. He waved her closer. "I might need you to help me stand tomorrow," he murmured, exhaustion creeping through his bones. She offered a small, rare smile. "I've done it before, King Jaime." He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Yes, you have." His eyes drifted closed. A wave of memory washed over him. The time she had dragged him out of a bear pit. The time she had fought off outlaws while he hung helpless, half-dazed. Their shared journey, each step forging a bond he had once never thought possible. Now she was the only person he truly trusted. In the following months, the realm tested him further. The Iron Islands bristled at the notion of kneeling to another Lannister king, but after some tense negotiations, they agreed to a compromise: autonomy in internal matters, so long as they recognized the crown's authority in external affairs and trade. A fragile peace, but better than open war. The Westerlands quietly accepted him as well, once they saw that the new king would not pillage their gold for vanity, but would invest it in strengthening roads and ports. The Stormlands were the trickiest, fractious after Gendry Baratheon's downfall, but a carefully arranged marriage between one of their prominent lordlings and a cousin of Jaime's established a tenuous alliance. All the while, Sansa Stark maintained her quiet realm in the north, separate and free. Yet she sent a raven with guarded congratulations on his coronation. Jaime accepted that as a sign she had no interest in further bloodshed. He replied in kind, acknowledging the North's independence and expressing a hope for peaceful cooperation, knowing that forcing them back under Southern rule would yield only renewed conflict. He had learned the cost of arrogance, and so the seasons turned and the battered land began to find a new equilibrium. Word reached him that the Dothraki who had accompanied Daenerys had mostly sailed back across the narrow sea or scattered in Essos. The surviving Unsullied had disbanded, some taking up quiet lives, others vanishing. The Targaryen threat, it seemed, had truly ended. More than once, Jaime thought about Aegon Targaryen Jon Snow and wondered where he was. He imagined him in the far north, beyond the wall even, living as a free man, removed from thrones and prophecies. Jaime hoped the man found peace. In King's Landing, schools opened, funded by the royal treasury to teach children their letters and sums. Temples to the Seven were rebuilt. The city watch was expanded. Jaime insisted on building more wells, more public granaries, and scouring the city for any hidden stashes of wildfire that might still lurk beneath. Every once in a while, a cask was discovered, promptly removed and neutralized. Jaime would stand there, his jaw clenched, recalling the day he killed Aerys to prevent a holocaust of green flame. Never again, he vowed. Despite all these efforts, unrest still simmered. Some lords disliked the notion of a humble, war-wearied king who was open to compromise. Others muttered that Jaime Lannister's claim was shaky. He was not crowned by a full council of lords, nor did he carry a sacred right by birth. They forgot that every king since Robert Baratheon claimed the throne by conquest, not by some hallowed tradition. Still, grumbles persisted in taverns, in lonely castle halls. Jaime could not quell every whisper, nor did he wish to rule by fear. In the midst of these political maneuvers, Jaime found moments of quiet solace in the small godwood that remained in King's Landing. It was meager, just a few weirwood saplings transplanted from somewhere in the Crownlands, their bark pale and eyes sorrowful. Yet the hush in that place was soothing. Brienne would often find him there, alone, gazing at the carved faces in the heart tree. He never prayed, or if he did, it was a silent prayer to no one in particular. Perhaps it was merely the calm, the sense of reflection that drew him. At times, he found himself wrestling with regrets, pushing Bran Stark from that tower window so many years ago, fathering children with his sister, carrying the arrogance of a golden lion that cared nothing for peasants or honor. He could not undo any of it. But each day he rose again, determined to do better. And maybe that, he told himself, was all any man could strive for. Summer in the capital came with intense heat, flies buzzing in the markets, and the stink of the Blackwater drifting on the wind. Jaime toiled in the Great Hall, signing decrees, mediating disputes among lords who still eyed each other with suspicion. Brienne was in the Riverlands, quelling a band of outlaws who had styled themselves as the last loyal servants of a Targaryen line. She returned after a fortnight, bruised but victorious, hauling their ragged leader in chains. Jaime had him tried in a public court, found guilty, and sentenced to serve a life of labor rebuilding roads. The more bloodthirsty lords clamored for execution, but Jaime refused. "We've had enough killing," he told them. "Let him earn redemption with toil if he can." Some scoffed. Others nodded in reluctant agreement. Ser Davos, as hand, constantly reminded Jaime of the fragile state of the crown's finances. The mines of Casterly Rock were not what they once were, and trade routes needed to be secured to refill the treasury. Jaime devised a plan to encourage commerce with Essos, granting certain privileges to merchants who risked bringing goods in bulk. He lowered some taxes, raised others. It was a delicate balancing act that might have drawn scorn from Tywin Lannister, but Jaime recognized that the realm would not rebuild without the cooperation of its people. Not all news was dire. Westeros, after so many years of war, began to experience a lull in violence. Bandits were fewer. Harvests in the Reach were plentiful. Dorne, always watchful, engaged in new trade deals, shipping exotic fruits and spices north. Ravens flew often between King's Landing and Sunspear. Jon Royce negotiated a pact to keep the Vale's knights at the ready should any major threat arise, in exchange for guaranteed shipments of fish and grain. Step by step, stone by stone, the realm was pieced back together like a battered tapestry. And at the heart of it all sat Jaime, on the Iron Throne or in council chambers, day after day. He wore the crown without ostentation, rarely dressing in the lavish robes previous kings had favored. His golden hand gleamed in the torchlight, a reminder of his personal cost. He listened more than he spoke. When forced to make judgments, he acted decisively, but not without weighing each consequence. In time, some began to call him the returned king, referencing how he had come back from near exile to rule. Others called him the broken king, mocking his lost hand and battered spirit. Jaime did not mind. If he was broken, then at least he had found a way to use that brokenness to mend a realm. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with streaks of crimson, Jaime slipped away from his duties and made his way to the city's lower docks. The harbor bustled still with sailors unloading crates of spices, cloth, and fruits. The calls of merchants mingled with the squawk of gulls. He walked among them, unannounced, accompanied only by 2 guards in plain cloaks. Some recognized him, their eyes widening, but no one rushed to bow or call out. Perhaps they sensed the king was there for simpler reasons. He found a quiet spot by the water where battered fishing boats bobbed. The smell of salt and seaweed washed over him. He leaned against a post, gold hand resting on the wooden beam, and gazed at the shimmering tide. Night was falling. Lanterns flickered along the quay. He found himself thinking of Tyrion again, remembering how his brother once told him about his dreams of sailing away to see the world. Jaime breathed a small sigh. If Tyrion were alive, he might have found a place in this new order. Possibly as master of coin or as a wry voice of reason on the council. But Tyrion was gone, vanished, or dead. That truth formed a hard lump in Jaime's throat. So many lost. Then came a familiar voice, low and quiet. Jaime? He turned to see Brienne standing behind him, clad in a simple tunic and breeches for once, her armor left behind. She looked out of place among the bustle, yet more comfortable than in the stiff formality of the court. Yes, he said softly. I needed air. She nodded, stepping up beside him, her shoulder almost level with his. They stood there, not quite touching, but close enough to feel each other's warmth in the night breeze. It's beautiful, she said, nodding toward the darkening sky, the water reflecting faint pinpricks of starlight. Strange how I never noticed it before, Jaime murmured. When I was younger, the sea was just an obstacle or a battlefield. She glanced at him. You've changed. He snorted softly. Everything has changed. Or does that? No, she said, shaking her head. I mean you specifically. I remember the man who was so proud, so sure of his own legend that he scoffed at any good deed. The man who would never show kindness just because it was the right thing to do. That man is gone. She paused. I'm glad. He felt a soft pang in his chest. He was a fool. But he was all I knew how to be once. My father's shadow loomed over me and Cersei's love, it's all behind me now. He swallowed, the mention of Cersei still a raw wound. Sometimes I wonder if I'd trade all this for a chance to undo the mistakes. But the dead don't return and the past is what it is. She gazed at him with quiet empathy. Life goes on, Jaime. We make the best of what remains. He nodded, letting the hush settle between them. The calls of sailors and the slap of water against hulls filled the space. At length he turned to her. I'm grateful for you. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be alive. I wouldn't even be here, trying to fix a realm. I'd probably be buried under rubble with my sister or lost in some ditch. Brienne looked away, discomfort flickering across her features. You saved me as well, she said quietly. We've returned the favor over and over, I think. That's how it is with us. He reached out tentatively and touched her arm. I suppose it is. His eyes lingered on her face, the strong curve of her jaw, the sincerity in her blue eyes. A surge of gratitude and warmth filled him. He did not speak more, words felt unnecessary. For a long moment they stood in companionable silence, watching the night claim the sea. When they returned to the Red Keep, the hush of the hour had settled over the courtyards. Torches sputtered along the battlements, and a trio of guards saluted as they passed. Within the keep, Ser Davos dozed in a chair outside the council chamber, a pile of parchments in his lap. Jaime nudged him awake gently. The old knight blinked, wiped at his eyes, and groaned about his aging bones. They spoke briefly of minor matters. Trade caravans from the Westerlands had arrived, bearing shipments of gold ore which might finally stabilize the crown's funds. Jaime nodded, relieved. Every small victory felt monumental. He dismissed Davos to bed and continued on to his quarters. Outside his door, Brienne paused. For a moment, Jaime thought she might join him, but she bowed respectfully, murmuring that she would see him on the morrow. He wondered if she knew he wanted her company. Yet he let her go without protest, mindful of the boundaries they each upheld. That night, sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of wildfire and crumbling towers. But in the morning, he rose, donned his armor, and readied himself for another day of rulership. The demands never ceased, a complaint from the Stormlands about shipping fees, a plea from the Riverlands for more men to patrol the roads, and entreaty from Dorne about restoring old trade privileges. Jaime faced each matter as best he could, with Davos's guidance, forging compromise where possible. Slowly, he developed a reputation for fairness, though some called it leniency. He would not sow fear among his subjects. Let them call him soft if that meant fewer widows in the realm. Weeks bled into months, and with them, a precarious stability took hold. The War of Many Kings was truly over, replaced by the reign of King Jaime Lannister. The small folk, weary and desperate, found a glimmer of hope in the efforts to restore farmland, markets, and peace. The lords, for the most part, accepted the new order, some grudgingly, others with cautious optimism. A hush of relief seemed to settle over Westeros, as though an old wound was finally being bound. One late autumn evening, Jaime was reviewing an old ledger in the council chamber when Brienne burst in, breathless. "Riders from the north," she announced. "They've arrived with a message." Jaime rose at once. "From Sansa Stark?" Brienne nodded, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Yes. The envoy requests an audience. He says it's urgent." Jaime's heart thudded. Had something changed in the north? Was Sansa pressing a claim on the southern throne or forging an alliance with some other house? He steeled himself. "Show them in." Moments later, a tall, fur-clad man entered, a northerner with a thick beard laced with bits of ice, as though he had ridden hard through cold weather. He bowed stiffly. "Your Grace, my name is Lord Manderly, son of the late Ser Wylis Manderly. I come bearing news from Winterfell." Jaime nodded, studying the man. "Speak. Is the Lady of Winterfell well?" Lord Manderly hesitated, eyes darting to Brienne, then back to Jaime. "She is well, in health. But she faces a dilemma. Wildlings have been crossing into the northern lands in greater numbers, escaping some trouble beyond the wall. We do not know the details, but it seems there is strife among the free folk, wars with other tribes, monstrous tales of beasts roaming the cold. She seeks the crown's cooperation in dealing with this influx. Many northerners resent the wildlings, but Lady Sansa wishes to avoid another war." Jaime listened carefully. "She needs food? Supplies? She wants southern assistance with patrolling the borders?" "A combination," Lord Manderly said. "She believes if the wildlings are allowed safe passage or offered land in the gift, it might avert violence. But it requires resources the North struggles to spare. She wondered if the crown would help. She has heard of King Jaime's willingness to avoid bloodshed, and she hopes for an accord." His tone was cautious, but there was a flicker of genuine respect. Jaime exchanged a glance with Brienne, who nodded in quiet support. "Lord Manderly," Jaime said, "you have come a long way. You will rest here, of course, and dine. I will consult with my council, but I see no reason why we should not help if it can prevent further loss of life. The North is independent, but we are not enemies." Lord Manderly's eyes lit with relief. "That is all Lady Sansa hopes for." Jaime dismissed him graciously, promising an answer soon. Once the man was gone, he turned to Brienne, exhaling softly. "So the wheel continues to turn. Another crisis, another frontier." She nodded. "But maybe an opportunity too. If you help Sansa with this, it could strengthen ties between North and South. Put old grudges to rest." "Yes," Jaime agreed. "It could." And so he summoned his council and laid out the matter. Ser Davos, ever the voice of practicality, pointed out the cost of sending grain north, especially with winter looming. But Jaime insisted that forging a peaceful solution might save them from a more expensive war down the line. Ultimately, they agreed to send provisions as a gesture of goodwill, along with a small delegation to meet with Lady Sansa and the wildling leaders. Brienne volunteered to lead that delegation, her experience in diplomacy hard-won through battles and negotiations alike. Jaime agreed. He trusted no one more with such a delicate mission. Days later, Brienne departed, riding north with 24 knights and several wagons of supplies. Jaime stood atop the repaired ramparts, watching her vanish into the horizon. A pang tugged at his heart, though he told himself she would return safe. She always did. Then, turning his gaze inward, he resumed his duties. He was king, after all, and the realm would not govern itself. It was a lonely feeling at times, sitting upon the Iron Throne. The seat of kings was never meant to be comfortable. But as time passed, he found satisfaction in small victories, a new harvest shipment, a reduction in crime, a favorable treaty. He sometimes wondered if this was what real kingship was meant to feel like, the slow, steady labor of caring for a kingdom. Not an endless parade of glory and battles, but the day-to-day nurturing of a realm like tending a garden. Winter approached. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, a chill seeping into the stones of King's Landing. Jaime had braziers placed in the throne room, the warm glow of coals a welcome sight. He spent the dark evenings listening to petitions by lamplight, often recalling those frenetic nights of war and fear. Now, there was only the hum of rebuilding. Some might call it boring, but to Jaime it was a relief. Finally, word reached him that Brienne had returned, accompanied by northern riders and a handful of wildlings who had come south to discuss a formal arrangement. Jaime received them in the Great Hall. The wildlings were a ragged, fierce-looking bunch, but Brienne vouched for their honesty. They had agreed to settle peacefully in certain northern territories so long as they were allowed to hunt and gather without fear of punishment. Sansa sought the crown's blessing on this arrangement. Jaime welcomed them, acknowledging their freedom and encouraging them to respect the laws of the North. A mild sense of disbelief rippled through the lords present, wildlings kneeling before a Lannister king? But times had changed, and so had Jaime. After the formalities, he seized a moment alone with Brienne in an antechamber. She reported the details of her trip, how Sansa looked well, strong, confident, cautious but not bitter. How the North's independence remained firm, but that there was genuine gratitude for Jaime's cooperation. Jaime thanked Brienne for her success, and they stood there in silent camaraderie, the flicker of torchlight dancing on the stone walls. "You look well," he told her, noticing the subtle flush in her cheeks from the cold. She gave a short nod. It was cold, but manageable. A faint smile touched her lips. "The North seems to hold no grudge against you personally. They're just wary of Southern politics. But many remember your role in ending the chaos. Word spreads." He managed a small chuckle. "Let them remember a better story than the Kingslayer, at least." Her gaze softened. "They do, Jaime." Another hush, and he felt the oddest urge to kiss her cheek, to brush aside the stray lock of hair that fell across her brow. He did neither, constrained by the unspoken lines each of them still observed. But in her eyes, he saw warmth that might one day blossom into something else, if only they allowed it. Winter deepened. Snow occasionally drifted over King's Landing, melting into sludge on the streets. The Crownlands saw more storms, but trade continued. Jaime oversaw the forging of new alliances, ensuring the realm remained stable. Months slid past, and the year turned. The watchful calm held, and the name Jaime Lannister was no longer spat with universal scorn. To some, he was the king who rebuilt, or the Lion King, or simply our king, spoken with a degree of acceptance Westeros had not shown a Lannister in many years. One day, Yohn Royce arrived in the council chamber with letters from the Vale. A new threat had emerged: raiders from the Stepstones harassing merchant ships. Jaime listened, devising a plan to send a modest fleet to patrol the region. He delegated authority, trusting the men at the table to carry out the strategy. While they debated details, Jaime's gaze wandered to the window where a pale sun glinted on the distant Blackwater. He smiled faintly, thinking that once, trouble in the Stepstones might have triggered a great war or political fiasco. Now, it was merely another problem to solve, another piece in a larger puzzle of governing. When the council concluded, Jaime stood and stretched, wincing as old battle scars pulled taut. He made to leave, but Davos cleared his throat. "Your Grace, there is another matter." Jaime turned back, brow raised. "Yes, Ser Davos?" The old knight fiddled with a scroll. "We've received requests from the Citadel. They wish to record an official chronicle of the War of Many Kings, including your ascension. They want to send a maester here to interview you and your companions." Jaime paused, an odd sensation fluttering in his stomach. The idea of being immortalized in a history book made him uneasy. But he realized it was inevitable. Kings were always chronicled, for good or ill. "Very well," he said. "We'll accommodate them." So a maester arrived, an earnest young scholar with ink-stained fingers. He asked Jaime countless questions about the war, the siege, the conspiracies, and the final battles. Jaime answered as honestly as he could, often deflecting praise onto those who had fought beside him, like Brienne, Davos, and the loyal knights who had endured the horrors of the Red Keep's last stand. When the maester probed about Jaime's personal feelings, why he had sought the throne, what he felt when he killed the Mad King, Jaime grew reticent. But he offered enough to satisfy the curious mind, determined that the realm should know the truth, not just the rumor-laden fantasies. If they called him an oathbreaker, so be it. He had broken an oath to save 500,000 people. History could judge him as it willed. In time, the realm stood on firmer footing. The faint glimmers of a stable peace shone. Markets bustled, roads were safer, and the memory of Dragonfire began to fade into stories told around hearths. There were still bandits, still feuds, still grudges. But overall, Westeros had found a king who did not relish war. A king who had once been the very symbol of dishonor now worked ceaselessly to uphold the fragile order that protected the people. And the people responded in kind, with cautious trust that grew day by day. One crisp morning, Jaime woke early, donned simple riding clothes, and took a single guard as he slipped out of the Red Keep. He rode through the city, across the repaired gates, and out into the countryside. The gold of his hair caught the pale sunlight, and the wind carried a faint chill. He urged his horse into a canter, following a dirt road that wound through rolling hills. At length, he came upon a secluded glade, dotted with autumn leaf trees. He dismounted, let the horse graze, and stood watching the sky. The guard respectfully kept a distance. Jaime closed his eyes, remembering the boy he had been, the golden heir to House Lannister, a prodigy with the sword, arrogant enough to think the world belonged to him. He thought of all his misdeeds, how they had shaped him. He thought of Cersei, whom he had once loved beyond reason, and how that love had burned itself out in a final conflagration of betrayal and madness. He thought of Tyrion, somewhere lost in the swirl of memory. And he thought of Brienne, whose unwavering honor had shown him a different path. "Am I truly worthy of this?" he whispered to the silent glade, raising his golden hand. The metal caught a shaft of sunlight, gleaming bright, almost like a beacon. Perhaps that was the answer, he decided. He was flawed, broken, a man who had made terrible choices. Yet somehow he stood as king. He had chosen to do what he could to mend a realm shattered by endless ambition and cruelty. Whether that made him worthy, he did not know. But it was enough that he tried. He mounted his horse again, riding back to the city. As he entered King's Landing, the people glanced up, some with smiles, some with nods of greeting. They recognized him, not with fearful bows or jeers, but with a certain acceptance. A blacksmith's apprentice waved shyly. A washerwoman curtsied. A fisherman lifted his cap. Small gestures, but they warmed Jaime's heart more than any thunderous applause could. Returning to the Red Keep, he ascended the rebuilt steps. The sun was fully risen now, shining upon the ancient stones that had seen so much death and despair. 2 Kingsguard knights saluted, and Jaime passed through the archway into the throne room. He slowed, gazing upon the iron throne with its melted swords and storied edges. A symbol of so many tragedies. Yet also, perhaps, a symbol of the realm's potential if guided with compassion rather than fear. Jaime stepped forward, the sound of his boots echoing in the near-empty hall. He approached the throne, let out a quiet breath, and seated himself upon it, feeling the familiar prick of metal. He rested his left hand on the throne's arm, his right gold hand settled upon his knee. For a moment, he simply sat in silence, letting the weight of the crown settle on his brow, letting the hush of the vast chamber envelop him. Memories flickered like phantoms, Aerys Targaryen's crazed eyes, the echo of swords clashing, the hush that followed the Mad King's last breath. He thought of the day he first sat on this throne in mocking triumph, an arrogant boy with bloodied steel in hand. Now he was a man tempered by loss and regret. He had killed one king, endured the fiery downfall of others, and outlasted them all. He was Jaime Lannister, king of the 7 kingdoms, though now they were more like 6, with the north free. A testament to how times change. Brienne strode into the hall quietly, her presence not surprising him. She always seemed to know when he needed her. She stood at the foot of the throne, head bowed slightly in respect. "Your Grace," she said. He inclined his head. "Sir Brienne." A faint smile touched her lips at the formal address. Then she spoke softly. "They're waiting for you in council to discuss the next round of infrastructure plans for the city. There's also a matter of some Stormlander lords who quarrel over a boundary." He nodded, letting the corners of his mouth lift in what might have been the ghost of a grin. "It never ends, does it?" "No," she said, stepping forward. "But you would not have it any other way." "True," he murmured, because he realized with a quiet certainty that he would not. There was something fulfilling in this labor of peace, in bridging divides and offering mercy where once he gave only scorn. He felt it in the steady rhythm of each day's tasks, in the gratitude of commoners, in the tenuous trust of lords who had once been enemies. And he felt it most keenly in the simple fact that he had finally found a purpose beyond the shadow of his sins. He rose from the Iron Throne and descended the steps, each footfall echoing. Pausing beside Brienne, he set his golden hand lightly on her arm, just for a moment, and let the corners of his lips curve. Then, with her by his side, he walked toward the council chamber where the future of Westeros awaited whatever judgments and accords he might craft. The swords of the throne rattled behind him, but their shadows no longer ruled him. He was Jaime Lannister, once Kingslayer, now king. And for the first time in his life, he felt a glimmer of hope that he might truly deserve the title. Outside, the city teemed with life, children, tradesmen, refugees returning to claim a new start. Ships bobbed in the harbor, carrying goods and possibility. The battered red walls of the keep still bore the scars of wildfire, but they stood, defiant, ready for whatever came next. And high above, in the throne room with its shattered columns and patched floors, sat a king who had once been the realm's most reviled knight. No one could have predicted this ending, but perhaps it was not an ending at all. Perhaps it was the realm's chance at a new beginning, forged by a man who knew the price of blood all too well and would strive, with every breath, to ensure it need never be paid again. And so Jaime Lannister ruled, the last king standing in a land that had almost torn itself apart. Where others had sought power for vanity or vengeance, he had come to it through pain and redemption. Where others had burned cities, he tried to rebuild. The realm's memory of him might one day be kind, might one day forget the harsh name of Kingslayer, might honor him simply as Jaime, the king who endured when all others fell. And in time, the realm would heal, and peace would not seem such an impossible dream. He did not flatter himself that this peace would last forever. In Westeros, storms always gathered on distant horizons. But for now at least, the storms were quiet and the people could breathe, could live, could hope. And in the halls of the Red Keep, sunlight fell upon the one who once shed the blood of kings, now wearing a crown not of triumph, but of duty. He carried the realm's burdens on his broad shoulders, forging a legacy that might, in the end, outshine his darkest deeds. A Lannister he remained, proud and noble in bearing, but something more than that as well. A knight who found his honor not in the praising tongues of courtiers, but in the humble tasks of justice and mercy. Thus did Jaime Lannister sit the Iron Throne, the St. King standing, determined that as long as breath filled his lungs, the realm would not kneel to chaos again. And if the gods were just, though he had never quite believed they were, they would grant him time enough to see the land flourish, to see children laugh in streets unscarred by war, to see a new generation born free of the sins that once defined him. In the stillness of that possibility he found solace. And so he ruled, guided by the lessons etched into his soul, and he dared, quietly, to believe that he might redeem a legacy once stained by fire and gold. He did not flatter himself that the newfound calm would last forever. In Westeros, conflict was rarely quelled for good, and the shape of old grudges merely changed into new ones. Yet in those early moons of what came to be known as King Jaime's reign, the kingdom finally drew in a collective breath, as if awakening from a long nightmare. The roads grew safer, and trade trickled in from distant ports. Refugees from previous wars dared to return home. Under the battered Lion King, they found, if not prosperity, then at least a semblance of peace. Jaime's days were seldom easy. He found himself always at work, poring over decrees, passing judgments, fielding the complaints of lords and small folk alike. Whenever possible, he walked the city streets and visited the outlying villages to see with his own eyes how the people fared. He was not a natural diplomat. Tyrion had always possessed that gift, but he had learned to mask his impatience and to listen. He knew his own failings, and that was half the battle. Soon, winter revealed its sharper teeth. Snow fell in the Crownlands, an unusual occurrence that transformed the city into a patchwork of white drifts, muddy slush, and frosty rooftops. The exodus of peasants who once fled King's Landing for fear of dragonfire had reversed. Now they returned, braving the cold in hopes that the capital offered safety and a chance at rebuilding their livelihoods. Jaime's administration scrambled to open the old granaries and better fortify the city's gates. So far, they had kept plague at bay and prevented widespread starvation. A feat in itself, given that the realm's coin stores were not what they had once been. Some days, Jaime would look out from the battlements toward the snow-mantled plains stretching beyond the Blackwater. He could see columns of smoke in the distance from village chimneys, caravans inching along roads half buried in snow, the occasional flicker of torchlight marking watchposts against bandits. He took little comfort in the knowledge that large-scale violence had been kept away from King's Landing. Beyond the edges of his domain, there were still outlaws, roving brigands, and lords with old scores to settle. Even so, the grim truth was that for Westeros this was a respite. By the standard of recent years, Robert's Rebellion, the War of the Five Kings, the Targaryen attempt at reconquest, the War of Many Kings, this hush of small-scale threats felt almost like a golden age. It wasn't, of course, but to the survivors it must have felt close enough. In the Red Keep, Jaime faced the daily rigors of kingship as best he could. He held council sessions often, with Ser Davos at his side as Hand of the King. Lord Yohn Royce of the Vale was Master of Laws, the Tarly's son was Master of War, and a quick-witted merchant lord from the Stormlands tended the realm's finances, all under the watchful eye of the Grand Maester. An empty seat for Master of Whispers remained. Jaime had delayed appointing anyone in that position. He dreaded the thought of such a post, so reminiscent of Varys's spider-like influence. Yet each time rumors arose of plots and old vendettas, Jaime felt a pang of worry that the realm's stability might hinge on having eyes in every corner. Brienne of Tarth, meanwhile, served not in the council but as Lord Commander of the King Guard, an appointment that had raised eyebrows, especially from those who believed the King's Guard must be male. Yet Jaime had insisted, pointing out her skill and honor. The King's Guard had been whittled down by war, only a few knights remained who were both capable and untainted by reputations as cutthroats. Ser Barristan Selmy was long dead, Ser Meryn Trant had been struck down, and so on. Brienne, to Jaime's mind, was the truest knight he had ever known. She commanded with unwavering integrity, recruiting others who might uphold the White Cloak as a symbol of duty, not ambition. And so white-cloaked knights now patrolled the keep under her direction, men and a few women newly knighted for valor and proved loyalty, forming a cadre that some whispered was more virtuous than any King's Guard in decades. As winter nights lengthened, Jaime took to reviewing old tomes in the library, searching for any clue on how past kings had managed to keep relative peace. Most histories, he found, offered little more than propaganda, lists of battles, genealogies, and genealogical claims. Rarely did a text say how to feed the starving or quell a rebellion without bloodshed. For that, he relied on his counsel and his own lessons learned through trial and error. Daily, he signed orders for shipments of grain, sentencing outlaws to restitution or labor, or pardoning older men who'd fought under a half-dozen banners in the last war and now only wanted to farm in peace. Each signature felt like a small attempt to nudge the realm closer to stability. He had known from the start that not everyone would be content under his rule. Indeed, tensions simmered in the Westerlands, where certain Lannister cousins and distant kin began jockeying for favor. Stories filtered in of noble families who resented Jaime's ascension. They claimed he had no right to claim the throne, that the Lannister line was impure after Cersei's downfall, or that Jaime's personal flaws, his lost sword hand, his moral lapses made him unworthy. Jaime recognized the old notes of aristocratic pride. Some had stoked the same distrust toward Tyrion in the past. Still, none of these malcontents dared open rebellion, not yet. The realm was too weary for another open war, and King Jaime's successes had earned him enough respect to dissuade reckless uprisings. The Reach, still rich in farmland despite heavy losses in prior conflicts, became the grain basket that kept King's Landing fed. In thanks, Jaime offered favorable trade terms, lower tariffs, guaranteed prices, which mollified the major lords in that fertile region. The Stormlands, ironically, needed more help to rebuild, as they had been battered by storms and led astray by Gendry Baratheon's brief and ill-fated claim. In each of these provinces, Jaime's envoys worked to secure alliances through trade, marriages, and the crown's promise of protection. He gave out gold sparingly, mindful of the empty coffers, yet he allocated resources to shore up battered strongholds. By slow degrees, the Stormlands warmed to him. In Dorne, the princess and her court still watched from a distance, honoring a wary peace. They had no love for Lannisters, but the horrors of war had not spared Dorne, and they had little appetite to test their armies against a realm determined to remain unified. Instead, they engaged in a subtle dance of diplomacy. Envoys carried proposals to open trade routes along the Boneway, to re-establish ties with King's Landing. The Martells had demanded autonomy in various matters. Jaime granted them a wide berth, so long as they recognized his sovereignty in name. They had done so, begrudgingly, and in return, Jaime acknowledged that Dorne's customs, taxes, and local laws were theirs to decide. That arrangement, though far from affectionate, kept the desert kingdom from stirring trouble. In the north, Lady Sansa Stark continued to reign independently. She had her own council, her own vassals, her own winter preparations. Yet her relationship with King Jaime was civil, and couriers traveled back and forth with measured regularity. Jaime made no demands that she bow to him. He recognized that insisting on suzerainty over the north would spark more hatred than it was worth. They had parted ways in the War of Many Kings, each focusing on saving what they could. So, an unspoken accord remained in place. The north was its own kingdom, and the 6 kingdoms to the south had Jaime as king. Some southerners gnashed their teeth at the notion of letting the north slip away, but Jaime paid no mind. A fragile peace was worth more than forcing an old claim. Occasionally, he thought of Jon Snow, the man once revealed as Aegon Targaryen, rumored to dwell in the far north or even beyond the wall. No one had heard from him in ages, and rumor placed him half in legend. Jaime wondered if perhaps that man had the right idea, leaving behind the tangle of crowns. Despite the realm's relative calm, Jaime's nights were seldom restful. His dreams often tormented him with images of the Mad King or of Daenerys Targaryen's dragon flame scouring King's Landing. He would wake in a sweat, heart drumming, half certain he smelled wildfire in the corridors. Other times he dreamed of Tyrion or Cersei or the day he lost his sword hand. Memories battered him, reminding him that peace was never guaranteed, that any day might bring a new horror. He took to walking the ramparts in pre-dawn hours, accompanied sometimes by Brienne, who kept silent vigil. She rarely asked him what plagued his sleep, but in her eyes he saw empathy. They had survived so much together that words felt inadequate. More than once he found himself leaning toward her, as if to rest his forehead against her shoulder, but he always straightened. A king could not show weakness, or so he told himself, though a quieter part of him whispered that perhaps he feared acceptance more than scorn. Even so, a warmth lingered between them, a trust deeper than oath or vow. Brienne kept the Kingsguard disciplined, training recruits in the yard each day. She sometimes joined Jaime for a light spar, though he remained at a disadvantage with his golden hand. He had practiced swordsmanship left-handed for years now, improving steadily, but the memory of being a brilliant swordsman was a cruel reminder of how far he'd fallen. Nonetheless, with each match, Brienne would correct his footwork, offer pointers on stance and defense, never belittling him for his lack of dexterity. He appreciated her honesty, her lack of flattery. In that dusty courtyard, as snow drifted around them, they found a fleeting sense of normalcy, a knight testing another's skill. Winter pressed on, and the harvest from the Reach proved essential. King's Landing survived with minimal famine, though the poorest districts still struggled. Jaime's officials distributed bread and salted fish to families in dire need, attempting to stave off starvation. Inevitably, there were rumors of corruption, city watchmen skimming rations, certain merchants hoarding goods. Jaime made an example of a minor official caught diverting grain to the black market, having him stripped of his post and sentenced to labor. That swift justice discouraged further graft, or so Davos reported. Over time, the system of rationing improved and the city's morale lifted. Yet no king's reign can remain untested. As the snows began to recede, a raven arrived bearing dire news from the Westerlands. A coalition of lesser lords, among them Crakehall, Marbrand, and Serret, had joined forces behind a man named Tybolt Lannister, a distant cousin of Jaime's, claiming that Tybolt was the rightful lord of Casterly Rock and, by extension, better suited to rule than a one-handed oath-breaker. Though none dared call Tybolt king outright, the raven suggested he meant to challenge Jaime's authority in the region, gathering swords and forging alliances with old Lannister bannermen disgruntled by the new monarchy. Jaime summoned an emergency council, the letter clutched in his gloved left hand. Tension filled the throne room as each council member read the note in turn. Davos's weathered brow furrowed. "They're mustering men near the borders of the Reach," he said. "That threatens our grain supply lines if they attempt raids." Yohn Royce cleared his throat. "We cannot allow open rebellion to fester. If these lords succeed in undermining your authority, others may follow. It's been, nearly 2 years since you took the throne? Some might claim that's long enough to question your resolve." Jaime tapped a finger on the arm of the Iron Throne, mind racing. "We cannot let them starve the capital," he said slowly. "But I also don't desire a bloodbath in the Westerlands. They are my own kinsmen, in a fashion. Perhaps we can reason with them before swords are drawn." The Tarly Scion, master of war, spoke up. "My men report that Tybolt's rhetoric is pointed. He calls your claim tainted by sin. He blames you for letting the North secede and for pardoning former enemies. He says a true Lannister would have crushed dissent. That sort of talk attracts those who yearn for the old ways. Jaime swallowed a wave of disgust. Send an envoy, he decided. Offer Tybolt terms. I'll recognize his right to Casterly Rock if he swears fealty to the crown and ceases these provocations. Let him be lord of the Westerlands under my rule if that's all he truly wants. Royce exchanged a look with Davos. It's a generous concession. Jaime shrugged, the faint glimmer of a cynical smile crossing his lips. I've no taste for ruling Casterly Rock. Let him have it if it will keep the peace. So they dispatched an envoy, Ser Balon Swan, a man known for tact and courtesy. Off he rode westward, carrying Jaime's sealed letter. Meanwhile, King's Landing prepared for the possibility of conflict. Jaime ordered no official muster of troops, not yet, but he quietly instructed Brienne to reinforce the city guard. He wrote to Lord Tarly, urging vigilance in the Reach in case Tybolt's men grew bold and threatened the roads. Weeks passed with no response. By the time the snows melted fully and spring crowned the land with fresh buds, Ser Balon Swan returned looking haggard. Tybolt refused your terms, he reported in the council chamber, voice laced with weariness. He called your offer the bribe of a crippled oathbreaker. He means to press his claim openly. He told me to inform you that the Westerlands will no longer recognize your crown unless you abdicate in his favor. Jaime's jaw tightened. He had half expected this. Then we must respond, he said quietly. Davos, muster the men we can spare. We need to protect the roads near the Mander. If Tybolt begins harassing our grain shipments, people will starve. Royce nodded in agreement. We can't let him rally more discontented lords. The Westerlands was once your family's stronghold, He might persuade enough bannermen to swell his ranks. He'll claim the gold mines to fund mercenaries. Jaime pinched the bridge of his nose. I'll go myself. A stunned hush gripped the council. Brienne spoke first, stepping forward, her voice firm. Your Grace, that is ill-advised. You're the king, if you ride into battle, who remains here to hold the realm together. Ser Davos looked equally concerned. We need your presence in King's Landing. The lords of other provinces might sense weakness if you depart. And there's risk, Tybolt could lure you into a trap. Jaime understood their worry but felt an old, familiar fire flickering in his veins. He was no stranger to war, nor was he simply a figurehead. The realm needs a king who will defend it, not cower in the Red Keep. If I send an army under someone else's command, Tybolt will spin that as further proof I'm not fit to rule. He's attacking the legitimacy of my reign. I have to show resolve. Let me lead a contingent enough to stave off aggression until he comes to the table. I don't seek to destroy him, only to protect what's ours and force him to reason. Brienne's eyes flicked to Davos, then back to Jaime. She swallowed. If you go, I go with you. Jaime inclined his head. I'd expect nothing less, Lord Commander. The debate went on for a time, with various council members urging caution. But Jaime would not relent, and Davos eventually relented with a weary sigh. It was decided, a royal host of moderate size would march west. Jaime would ride at its head, flanked by Brienne and a mix of loyal knights from the Crownlands, the Stormlands, and even the Vale. They would not muster the entire royal army. Westeros was too large to leave unguarded, but they'd bring enough strength to dissuade Tybolt from launching open war. The Master of War would remain behind in King's Landing, coordinating any reinforcements if needed. Davos would stay his hand, ensuring the capital functioned in the king's absence. Letters flew by Raven to the Reach, requesting support or at least neutrality. Jaime hoped to avoid the scenario of the Westerlands and the Reach colliding, which would devastate the entire southwestern portion of the realm. He also wrote a personal note to Sansa Stark explaining the situation, though he doubted she would intervene beyond offering mild condolences. Preparations took a fortnight. By early spring, Jaime's hosts set forth from King's Landing, banners snapping in a crisp wind. Golden lions, a few crowned lion sigils improvised for the new Lannister king, the black bat of House Swan, the sunburst of House Tarth, and others, a motley tapestry representing the alliances Jaime had painstakingly built. Along with them traveled supply wagons, foraging scouts, and a small retinue of maesters and scribes. At the front, Jaime rode a warhorse clad in plate that gleamed with simple steel. He disdained gold plating or gaudy ornamentation. His golden hand gripped the reins while his left hand rested near his sword hilt. Brienne rode beside him, tall and imposing in white armor, the cloak of the Kingsguard billowing behind her. As they passed through the city gates, small folk gathered to watch. Some cheered, others stood silent, fear flickering in their eyes at the sight of an army departing. War had brought King's Landing only misery in recent memory. Jaime understood that. He gave them a nod, urging his horse onward. The city vanished behind them, swallowed by the rolling countryside. They trekked westward across highways once shattered by the War of the Five Kings and the Targaryen conquest attempt. Jaime recalled those days with a grim twist of memory, the blood, the chaos, the ruin. The land seemed to remember too, still bearing scars of burned farms and half-collapsed keeps. Riding among the ranks, Jaime listened to the men's chatter. Many were veterans of the previous wars, having fought for or against the Lannisters, the Targaryens, or the Baratheons. Yet they rode together now under Jaime's banner, united by the oath to maintain peace. Some joked that the realm needed no more funerals, that perhaps Tybalt would lose his nerve. Others muttered about the Westerland's cunning, reminding each other that Lannister gold could buy trouble. Jaime let them speak, not interfering. He was no fool. He knew morale depended on giving men space to voice their anxieties. They reached the King's Road, pivoted southwest, and entered the rolling hills that marked the approach to the Westerlands. Scouts rode ahead, scanning for any sign of Tybalt's forces. After a few days, they began encountering outriders wearing the sigils of Craighall and Marbrand, who kept their distance and did not provoke a direct skirmish. Clearly, Tybalt's men were watching, measuring the royal host's strength. Jaime kept his troops tight and disciplined, knowing that any sign of vulnerability might invite an ambush. They made camp near a small river one evening, with the setting sun igniting the sky in flames of gold and pink. As the men pitched tents, Jaime stood on a rise overlooking the flowing water, his breath pluming in the chill air. Brienne joined him, removing her helm and shaking out her golden hair that had been cropped to a practical length. "Do you truly believe Tybalt will come to terms?" she asked quietly. Jaime considered the question, mind heavy. "I want to believe it. He's a Lannister, or near enough, which means he might be swayed by logic and self-interest. The gold mines of the Westerlands thrive best when there's trade with the rest of the realm. If he insists on war, he could disrupt that trade, even ruin it for years. But pride can override reason, as I well know." She nodded, gazing out at the darkening horizon. "We'll be ready for whatever comes." He glanced at her, feeling that old ache of gratitude. "I know we will." As night fell, they lit campfires, posted sentries, and tried to rest. Jaime found himself unable to sleep, wandering among the tents, exchanging greetings with knights on watch. He could not help recalling other camps, other nights, when he was younger and full of arrogance, or later when he was a prisoner to men he had once scorned. War camps always carried a certain tension, the sense of possibility that any moment might erupt into violence. At dawn, they broke camp, continuing their march. After another day, they reached a broad valley flanked by low, rocky hills. Scouts reported a sizable force was arrayed on the far side, near a stream. Banners of Craighall, Marbrand, Serret, and Lannister red and gold fluttered in the distance. Tents gleamed white in the morning sun, like teeth bared in a snarl. Tybalt's men had gathered, presumably ready to defend their claim. Jaime ordered his soldiers to halt and form ranks along the valley's western edge, sending out a messenger under a flag of parley. While they waited for a response, Jaime rode along the lines, ensuring each unit was positioned to defend or charge if need be. The tension was palpable, horses snorting, men fidgeting with weapons. Brienne remained at his side, her eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of treachery. Archers on the ridges, hidden cavalry, the usual hazards of battle. At last, a handful of riders emerged from the opposing camp. Leading them was a tall man in ornate plate of crimson and gold, a lion's helm under his arm. He wore a cloak trimmed in fur, despite the warming season. Even from a distance, Jaime recognized the bearing. Proud, imperious, reminiscent of Tywin Lannister in certain angles. This must be Tybalt. His hair was a pale golden brown, a few shades darker than Jaime's, his features angular. He looked to be in his late 20s, brimming with the confidence of youth untested by real hardship. Jaime rode forward with Brienne, each followed by 2 standard-bearers and a handful of guards. They met in the middle of the valley, halting a stone's throw from the other. For a heartbeat, the 2 sides eyed each other, wary of treachery. But the parley was respected. Tybalt spoke first, voice carrying clearly in the still air. "King Jaime," he said, the faintest sneer curling his lip. Or should I say, Sir Jaime, since you have no right to the crown? Jaime regarded his distant cousin calmly. I wonder if you speak for yourself or for those lords behind you. The realm calls me king, Tybalt, and I see no crown on your head. A muscle flicked in Tybalt's jaw. Your rule is a sham. You let the North slip away. You treat with the Dornish as if they are your equals. You pardon traitors who served the Targaryen pretender. House Lannister must be strong again if we're to prosper. We cannot bow to a man who disgraces our name. Jaime cast a glance behind Tybalt, noting the lords arrayed there. Lord Craighall looked uneasy. Lord Marbrand wore a frown. Others simply watched with guarded expressions. How exactly have I disgraced our name? Jaime asked. By trying to heal the realm instead of ravaging it further? Tybalt snorted. By forgetting what it means to be a lion. We do not compromise with the likes of the Starks or the Martells. We do not kneel to half the realm's demands. You've made a mockery of our legacy. Better to have a decisive leader in the Rock, someone who can command respect through might. Brienne's voice cut through the stillness. Respect is not fear. Any brute can terrorize the realm. This king has chosen a different path. Tybalt's gaze flicked to her. And who are you, woman, to lecture me on brutality? Jaime felt a surge of anger, but Brienne remained poised. She said nothing else, merely stared back in unflinching silence. Jaime drew a breath, letting the moment stretch. You speak of House Lannister's legacy, he said, focusing on Tybalt again. I remember Tywin Lannister well, my father. He was feared, yes, and it brought short-term gains. But it also stoked hatred that burned for generations. I'd rather not see our lands drenched in blood again. Tybalt's eyes flared. Your father built an empire of wealth and power, and you squander it by coddling traitors. The Westerlands deserve a rightful lord who will restore our glory. Surrender your claim, and we'll let you live out your days in quiet disgrace. Jaime laughed, a short, mirthless sound. I offered you Casterly Rock. You refused. So you don't just want the Westerlands, you want my throne, or to tear it down altogether. If you press this, Tybalt, you'll drag us all into another war. Tybalt raised his chin. So be it. My men stand ready. If the Lannister name must be cleansed by steel, I'll see it done. Jaime's heart sank. He had hoped for even a sliver of reason. In the name of the realm, let us not repeat the same mistakes. Stand down. We can negotiate a settlement. You can have the Rock, a seat on the council if you wish. There's no need for bloodshed. Tybalt's knuckles whitened around his reins. Your words are weakness. I will show Westeros the true face of House Lannister. If you will not bend, then you will break. He turned abruptly to his men, gestured sharply, and they wheeled their horses about, heading back to their lines. Jaime exhaled, the tightness in his chest intensifying. He looked at Brienne. She shook her head. He won't be swayed, Jaime. Pride has him by the throat. They rode back to their own lines in grim silence. Jaime called his captains, quickly outlining a strategy. They would form a defensive line on higher ground, forcing Tybalt to come to them. Jaime wanted no part of a glorious cavalry charge. He knew how illusions of grandeur could lead to disaster. Instead, he deployed archers on the flanks, pikes in the center, and cavalry on either side, ready to encircle if Tybalt advanced. Their force was well trained, if not massive. Jaime intended to force a stalemate, perhaps to bring Tybalt back to the negotiating table if his first assault failed. The sun climbed higher. Tension crackled in the air. Tybalt's hosts spread out in the valley, dust rising around them, ranks of men bearing the sigils of allied houses. Jaime watched from a mild rise, with Brienne at his side. He recalled other battles, the swirl of chaos, the crash of steel. He hated the thought of leading men to slaughter. But Tybalt had left him no choice. A horn echoed across the valley. Tybalt's cavalry began a slow advance, accompanied by infantry in the center. Jaime signaled his own horns to sound. Archers readied arrows, pikes lowered. The valley turned into a tableau of drawn lines, each side bracing for violence. Jaime's pulse thundered. No matter how many battles he had fought, the moment before the clash always seized his nerves with a cold grip. Then it began. Tybalt's infantry surged forward, intending to close the distance quickly. Jaime's archers let fly a volley of arrows that whistled through the air, thudding into shields and flesh. Men screamed, stumbling. Another volley followed. Still, Tybalt's columns kept coming, shields locked. When they reached the pikes, a furious melee erupted. Jaime heard the clang of weapons, the shouts of commanders. The lines surged back and forth, steel scraping steel. On the flanks, Tybalt's cavalry circled, looking for weak points to exploit. Jaime bellowed orders to hold formation, scanning the battlefield. He spotted Tybalt himself on the opposite flank, surrounded by a wedge of knights. They wore shining helms with lion crests. Tybalt seemed to be directing them toward a gap in Jaime's line. Jaime gestured for a portion of his cavalry to intercept. Hoofs pounded as knights in royal colors thundered to meet Tybalt's charge. The clash was deafening. Horses shrieked, lances shattered, men toppled beneath churning hooves. Jaime urged his own horse forward, unable to remain on the sidelines while his men fought. Brienne followed at his side. They galloped along the rear of their lines, watching for signs of a breakthrough. Dust and blood filled the air, the acrid tang of sweat and panic. Here and there, archers switched to close combat, brandishing daggers, while pike-bearers tried to maintain formation. Tybalt's men fought with grim determination, fueled by a fanatical belief that they were restoring the Lannister name. Jaime's forces fought with unity, a sense of protecting the realm from yet another outbreak of madness. At one point, a mounted knight bearing the Crakehall boar sigil broke through the lines and spurred his horse straight at Jaime, sword raised. Jaime managed to parry with his left hand, the impact jolting him down to his teeth. The knight slashed again, nearly unseating Jaime. But Brienne reined in, her blade slicing across the knight's back. He crashed to the ground with a scream. "There's too many on the left," one of Jaime's captains shouted, pointing toward a bulge in the lines where Tybalt's infantry pressed hard. Jaime wheeled his horse that way, rallying nearby cavalry. They crashed into the flank of the attacking force, scattering men. For a moment, the lines stabilized. Hours seemed to blur. Jaime's sword arm throbbed from repeated clashes. His mouth tasted of dust and bile. Men died around him, their cries haunting the churn of battle. Still, he held to his plan, maintaining discipline, refusing to be lured into a reckless charge. Tybalt's men, seeing they couldn't easily break through, began to waver. Over the din, Jaime shouted for his horns to sound. The brazen call echoed once more across the battlefield, a signal for Brienne to lead a fresh squad of knights in a sweeping maneuver from the right flank. Her knights advanced, smashing into Tybalt's exhausted cavalry. With that, the tide turned. Men started to scatter, some throwing down arms. Tybalt himself found his wedge all but surrounded. Jaime saw him engaged in fierce combat, golden armor splashed with blood, roaring orders for his men to hold. But the momentum was lost. Within the hour, the rebel lines collapsed into a rout. Many fled, pursued by Jaime's outriders, others huddled in pockets of resistance, quickly subdued by the pikes. By late afternoon, the valley belonged to Jaime's host. In the aftermath, the field lay strewn with corpses, wounded men groaning. Jaime rode among them, battered and numb. He spotted the banners of Crakehall and Marbrand in disarray, their men kneeling with hands raised or lying in the dust. He commanded the maesters to tend to the wounded, friend and foe alike. This was not a war of extermination. He wanted survivors, not vengeance. Finally, he found Tybalt. The rebel lay on his back near a shallow stream, breathing raggedly. An arrow protruded from his shoulder, blood soaking his fine cloak. A handful of loyal guards crouched near him, all severely wounded, pinned by a ring of Jaime's spears. When Jaime dismounted and approached, Tybalt's gaze flicked up, fury and pain mingling in his eyes. "It didn't have to be this way," Jaime said, voice quiet, sorrow evident. Tybalt coughed, spitting blood. "You think I fear death, Kingslayer? I'd rather die than bend the knee to a false king." Jaime knelt beside him, unstrapping a water skin. "Drink," he ordered. Tybalt sneered at first, but finally accepted a sip, grimacing. "You lost," Jaime murmured. "Surrender now, and I'll spare you. You can remain lord of whatever lands your father left you. Your men will be pardoned if they swear loyalty to the crown. Let's not spill more blood." Tybalt's lips curled. "There's no victory in surrender. You'll drag the Lannister name through the mud as you've done since you killed Aerys." Jaime's patience, already worn thin, held by a thread. "You speak of the Mad King as if he deserved loyalty. I saved 500,000 souls from wildfire that day. Call me Oathbreaker or Kingslayer all you wish, but I know what I did. And now I'm giving you a chance to live." Tybalt grimaced, the arrow in his shoulder shifting as he breathed. "Go to the 7 hells." Jaime rose, exchanging a glance with Brienne, who stood nearby. She frowned. "He's bleeding badly. If he doesn't yield, he'll die." Jaime turned back to Tybalt. "Your men are finished. You gained nothing but corpses here. Don't be a fool." Tybalt's face twisted in hate. "I only regret that I failed to kill you myself." Then, with a sudden surge of movement, he grasped the arrow in his shoulder and yanked it out, screaming in agony, blood spurting. Before anyone could react, he drove the arrowhead toward his own throat in a final act of spite. A guard tried to stop him, but Tybalt twisted, cutting into his jugular. Blood flooded, and his eyes rolled back. Jaime knelt again, pressing a hand to the wound, but it was too late. Tybalt's life poured onto the ground, the faint rattling in his throat fading rapidly. Jaime felt a sick jolt of pity and frustration. He had tried to save a man too blinded by pride to be saved. With a heavy sigh, he stood, noticing that some of Tybolt's men were watching, stricken. They had fought for him, perhaps believing in a glorious cause, only to see him die by his own hand rather than yield. Jaime lifted his head, addressed them. "This is over," he said, voice resonating across the silence. "Lay down your arms. You'll have quarter if you swear loyalty to the crown. No more blood." Their expressions were battered, weary. One by one, they cast down their weapons. Some sank to their knees. The battle had ended, but the aftermath weighed heavily. That night, Jaime's camp extended what mercy they could to the wounded. Pyres burned for the dead on both sides. The smell of charred flesh mingled with the metallic tang of blood, a sickening stench that made men and women alike retch behind tents. Jaime walked among the survivors, giving orders for the surgeons to tend them, ensuring that no prisoner was left to die untended. He found little satisfaction in victory. Each body reminded him that he had failed, in some measure, to prevent violence. But at least the rebellion had been snuffed out quickly, sparing the realm a more drawn-out war. Dawn broke cold and pale. With Tybolt dead, the allied lords scrambled to salvage their positions. They came to Jaime, heads bowed, offering apologies and excuses for their revolt. Some claimed Tybolt had deceived them, promising that Jaime's rule was on the verge of collapse. Others insisted they'd had no choice, that to resist Tybolt would have meant losing their own lands. Jaime listened, weighed their words. He demanded they bend the knee and reaffirm their loyalty to the crown. Then he set conditions for their pardons: tribute in grain or coin to help feed the capital, relinquishment of any claim to independence, and acceptance of watchers from King's Landing to ensure they did not conspire again. To his relief, they all agreed, though grudgingly. Only Lord Craighall tried to protest. "We've sworn loyalty before, yet the realm has changed hands more times than I can count," he grumbled. "What if we swear loyalty to you today, and tomorrow another Targaryen emerges with a dragon to claim the throne?" Jaime's eyes were cold. "Then I will face that threat as I have faced all others. If you can't abide my rule, say so now, and we'll settle it here." Craighall blanched, hastily bowing. "No, your grace. I yield." Thus ended the uprising in a single decisive battle, with Tybolt's lifeless body entombed in a hastily dug grave. Jaime ordered that it be marked, at least with the courtesy of a small cairn. He loathed the idea of letting a Lannister corpse rot in the open, no matter how misguided Tybolt had been. Yet he also refused to grant him the honor of a grand funeral at the Rock. Tybolt had chosen his fate. In the days after the battle, Jaime led his host onward into the Westerlands, visiting key castles to ensure that the newly reaffirmed lords complied with his terms. At each stop, he delivered measured words: that the war was over, that the realm needed unity, that the crown would not tolerate further rebellions. Some lords feigned eager loyalty, throwing banquets to welcome him. Others bristled but kept their faces carefully neutral. All knew that resisting again so soon would be folly. The gold mines of the Westerlands depended on stable trade, and Jaime made it clear that if they stirred trouble, trade routes would close. Word spread swiftly of Tybolt's defeat. By the time Jaime's host reached the outskirts of Lannisport, a thriving harbor city near Casterly Rock, there was little talk of continued rebellion. The city opened its gates, its merchants anxious to ensure the crown did not penalize them. Jaime found it unsettling to walk streets he had known as a boy, once believing he would inherit all this as the Lord of Casterly Rock. Now he came as king, but with no desire to linger in his ancestral seat. The memories were too thick. Memories of Tywin's stern rule, Cersei's cunning, the boyhood arrogance that had shaped him. The last time he had walked these avenues, it had been before losing his hand, before everything changed. Still, he traveled to Casterly Rock, that great fortress perched above the sea, the ancestral stronghold of House Lannister. He wished to confirm that it was secure and to speak with the Castellan. The imposing red walls and massive lion statues remained as formidable as he remembered, though the corridors felt strangely empty. Tywin's commanding presence haunted every corner, and even Cersei's ghost seemed to linger in the shadows of halls where she had once roamed as a girl. Jaime found himself standing on a balcony overlooking the sea, remembering how he and Cersei would sometimes sneak out to watch the sunset, whispering about their grand futures and secret liaisons. Brienne joined him there, her armor reflecting the late afternoon sun. She looked around with curiosity. "It's strange," she said softly. "I've never been inside Casterly Rock, though I always heard stories of its grandeur. Now it feels quiet." "It was grand," Jaime allowed, voice low. Perhaps it still is, but I can't feel it anymore. All I sense are ghosts. The sea breeze ruffled his hair. I don't want it, Brienne. Let the Westerlands keep their fortress. My place is in King's Landing, such as it is. She studied him. You could leave a loyal steward here, someone you trust to maintain order. He inclined his head. I intend to. House Lannister needs a caretaker, not a rebellious fool chasing glories. Perhaps one of my distant cousins who never dabbled in Tybalt's plots. Or even a brand new branch of the family. I can't say I care who sits in these halls, so long as they don't conspire to plunge the realm into war. She nodded, understanding. They lingered a while, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. In the distance, gulls wheeled and called, the waters around Lannisport shimmering in the dying light. Jaime felt a pang of old regret, but also a sense of release. He had always been a lion of the rock, yet now he recognized that he belonged elsewhere, doing what he could to keep the realm from self-destruction. That evening, Jaime conducted a brief ceremony in the Great Hall. He officially appointed a mild-mannered cousin, Roland Lannister, a scholarly man with no taste for battle, as the new castellan, granting him the right to govern in the king's name. House Lannister's bannermen bore witness, grudgingly accepting the new arrangement. The next day, Jaime and his host departed, leaving behind a garrison to discourage any further plots. Their duty done, they began the journey back east, returning to King's Landing before the summer months wore on. During the ride back, Brienne observed Jaime closely. He seemed pensive, the lines of his face etched with deeper weariness than before. One evening, as they made camp by a gentle stream, she approached him while he stood looking at the setting sun. He offered a faint smile when he saw her. You're troubled, she said simply. He let out a soft sigh. Just thinking about the cost of everything. Tybalt's men, my men, hundreds dead, for what? Pride? Legacy? I killed a cousin once, did you know? In the war with Robb Stark, he was my prisoner, and I used him to attempt an escape. Jaime's jaw tightened. Back then, I barely felt a flicker of remorse. It was all about survival. Now I feel every death like a thorn in my side. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and laid a hand on his arm, his real arm, not the golden hand. You've changed, Jaime. That's not a weakness. It means you're finally seeing the weight of your actions. He nodded, eyes clouded. I know. Doesn't make it easier. They stood in silence, the hush broken only by the camp bustle behind them. Thank you, he added softly, for standing by me. She squeezed his arm lightly, then withdrew her hand. I swore an oath to protect you, my king. Her voice held a gentle note that went beyond formality, and he sensed how much it cost her to say such words after a lifetime of being mocked as a woman knight. But there was sincerity too, and acceptance that they were in this together. They returned to King's Landing after another fortnight of travel. By then, ravens had carried news of Tybalt's defeat across the realm. The sight of Jaime's army riding through the gates, battered but victorious, stirred relief among the people. After all, it was only a brief conflict, far less destructive than the previous wars, but still a test of the king's resolve. Jaime oversaw the disbanding of most of the forces, letting men return to their lives. He kept a core group under arms in the capital, just in case. A subtle shift occurred in the court's atmosphere. Lords and courtiers who had once doubted Jaime's fortitude seemed to regard him with new respect. He had proven he would not yield to rebels, yet also shown clemency to those who surrendered. Some found that perplexing, but it planted a seed of grudging admiration. The king who rebuilt had now also become the king who ended the Westerlands' rebellion. Stories circulated of how he had personally tried to save Tybalt's life, only to be rebuffed. In a realm weary of cruelty, the tale gained traction, adding a hint of tragedy to his reputation. Jaime, however, found no comfort in the rumors. He plunged back into the routines of governance, dealing with the realm's ongoing tasks. Summer had begun, bringing warmth and a surge in trade. Merchant ships flocked to King's Landing's harbor, bringing wares from as far as Volantis and Bravos. The city's markets bustled, rebuilding from the ashes. The gold from the Westerlands, now more securely under the Crown's supervision, funded repairs to roads and bridges. The capital slowly acquired a sheen of renewed prosperity, though Jaime was careful not to let extravagance run rampant. The scars of war were still too fresh to forget. During these busy months, he rarely found a quiet moment for himself. Ser Davos coordinated the shipping and trade expansions. Jon Royce wrestled with local disputes, and the Master of Coin oversaw new taxes. Brienne, as Lord Commander, expanded the Kingsguard's responsibilities. She instituted training programs for the City Watch, insisting on higher standards of conduct. Jaime endorsed her reforms wholeheartedly. The fewer brutes and bullies patrolling the streets, the better. Amid this bustle, Jaime heard occasional whispers of discontent. Lords muttering that the king was soft, or that his attempts at fairness were naive. Some said that Tybalt had been right, that the old lion's spirit was lost. Yet no new rebellions arose, and most recognized the realm was better off stable. Jaime paid these murmurs little heed. He was painfully aware of what unbridled might had done to Westeros. He refused to repeat the cycle. His personal life remained in a curious limbo. He and Brienne spent a great deal of time together, sparring, discussing security matters, even sharing quiet suppers when the day's work ended late. Their friendship had deepened into something he could not quite name. He felt unspoken feelings coiling in his chest whenever they were alone. But neither of them moved to breach that unspoken boundary. The ghosts of the past Cersei, his own sense of guilt, Brienne's unwavering code, kept them locked in a careful dance of mutual respect. Yet every stolen glance, every accidental brush of hands, spoke volumes that neither would articulate. One humid afternoon, Jaime sat in the royal solar with a cluster of letters. He had let the day's heat build, reluctant to keep the windows shut. The city below shimmered in the haze. As he scanned the letters, one caught his eye, a message bearing the wax seal of the citadel. He broke it open, finding a polite request for an audience. It seemed Archmaester Helman, a historian, wished to interview him further for the official chronicle of the War of Many Kings. Jaime sighed. The last time a maester had come for an extended interview, it had dredged up painful memories. Still, he supposed this was part of a king's duty. History required some record of events. He penned a brief reply inviting the Archmaester to come in a fortnight, then set the letter aside. His thoughts drifted to Tyrion. The memory of his younger brother stung like an old wound. Tyrion would have relished sharing these stories, spinning them with that sardonic wit. Jaime wondered if Tyrion might still live, hidden in some corner of Essos or traveling incognito. Often, Jaime found himself hoping for a word, a sign, some improbable rumor that the imp had returned. But none ever came. That evening, after a late council session, Jaime sought refuge in the Red Keep's small godwood. The transplanted weirwoods were stunted compared to those in the north, but they offered a pocket of quiet greenery. He knelt by the heart tree, eyes half closed, letting the hush settle over him. The trickle of a small fountain mingled with the distant hum of city life. He sensed a presence behind him. A soft step, the faint sound of metal shifting. "Brienne," he said without turning. "I didn't mean to disturb you," she replied, her voice low. He rose, brushing dirt from his knees. "You never disturb me. Did you need something?" She shook her head. "I came to see if you were well. You seemed distant at the council today." He managed a wry smile. "Am I that transparent?" She took a half-step closer, the candlelit torches around the godwood illuminating her strong features. "I've learned to read you better than most," she admitted. Jaime's mouth quirked in something like gratitude. "It's just the usual burdens. Letters from lords complaining about taxes, requests from the citadel, demands for marriage alliances, petty border disputes, and all that. Nothing a king shouldn't handle. But sometimes it feels like an avalanche of demands with no end." She searched his eyes. "You've borne worse. This is merely the weight of peace." He gave a short laugh. "A poet you are not, Brienne. But you're right. I'd rather the weight of peace than the frenzy of war." He exhaled. "Do you ever think we might be too late? That the realm is so broken by years of conflict that no matter what I do, it'll collapse again?" She frowned. "We can't control the future. We can only do what's right here and now. You've stopped at least one rebellion. You've brought a measure of stability. That's more than many kings can claim." He nodded slowly. "Thank you." He let silence stretch, watching her face. Embers of unspoken emotion stirred in him, the feeling that had grown over years of hardship and shared struggle. In another life, perhaps he would have spoken openly, asked for more than companionship. But this was the life they had, full of haunted memories and uncertain duties. Brienne cleared her throat, her gaze drifting to the weirwood. "If you ever need to talk about anything, you know I'll listen." Jaime's chest tightened. He bowed his head slightly. "I know," he murmured. "I'm grateful." She clasped her hands behind her back, that old knightly stance. For a moment it looked as if she might say more. Then she merely inclined her head. "I'll leave you to your reflection," she said softly, turning to go. As he watched her depart, the gold of her hair catching the torchlight, he felt a pang of longing he had no idea how to resolve. He closed his eyes, steeling himself. There was a realm to govern. And for now that had to come first. In the following fortnight, Archmaester Helmon arrived with a small retinue of novices, scrolls, and quills in hand. They settled in the keep's library, requesting daily interviews with Jaime, his counselors, and any soldiers or courtiers who had witnessed the war. Jaime tolerated the intrusions, sitting for hours of questions about tactics, alliances, and personal reflections. Helmon was an inquisitive, polite man, less invasive than the previous maester, though occasionally he probed sensitive subjects: Aerys' death, Jaime's affair with Cersei, the charges of kingslaying. Jaime answered as calmly as he could, focusing on factual details. He refused to delve deeply into personal shame or regrets, and Helmon, sensing his reluctance, did not press too far. Sometimes after the interviews, Helmon would sigh. "Your Grace, the realm is fortunate you ended the cycle of slaughter when you did. My hope is that future generations can learn from these tragedies so that we might avoid repeating them." Jaime almost laughed. "Men have short memories, Archmaester. They repeat their mistakes all too readily. But if your chronicle helps even a few see the cost of war, then perhaps it's worth writing." Summer heated the city further. Fleas and mosquitoes proliferated, buzzing around the alleys and the waterfront. The small folk complained about the stench of the Blackwater, which was never pleasant but became unbearable in the baking sun. Jaime ordered the construction of more public wells, sewers, and latrines, hoping to alleviate some of the squalor. The city's cost was high, but the realm's finances were slowly improving thanks to stable trade. Now and then, Jaime considered levying an additional tax on the Westerland's gold mines, but he refrained, knowing it might kindle new resentments so soon after Tybolt's rebellion. Diplomacy required patience. Meanwhile, tidings from the north remained largely uneventful. Lady Sansa managed her own kingdom quietly, focusing on feeding her people through the tail end of winter and forging alliances with the free folk who had settled in the Gift. Jaime learned through travelers that the north had its own tensions. Some northern lords still distrusted the wildlings, while others were content to follow Sansa's measured approach. But no major conflicts broke out. It seemed Sansa preferred the same path Jaime did, cautious rebuilding. From Dorne came a rare invitation, a grand tourney in Sunspear, meant to celebrate the princess's nephew coming of age. Jaime debated attending. A royal visit to Dorne might show goodwill. Yet it was also far from the capital, and he worried about leaving the city vulnerable or giving discontented lords another chance to plot. Ultimately, he decided to send Yohn Royce and a small delegation. Perhaps in another year, he might venture that far, but for now, the realm felt too fragile. One day, a raven arrived from Braavos. The Iron Bank, which had financed various claimants over the years, sent a formal note congratulating King Jaime on the stabilization of the realm and inquiring about new trade opportunities. Jaime rolled his eyes at the politely veiled request for interest payments on old crown's debts, loans that Robert Baratheon, Joffrey, and even Cersei had once accumulated. The realm still owed the Iron Bank a considerable sum. But now that a measure of peace reigned, the Braavosi bankers wanted their coin. Jaime disliked dealing with them, but he recognized that reneging on the debt would provoke them to finance some new usurper. So he penned a careful reply, offering partial repayment and a plan to settle the debt in installments. Even the king who rebuilt could not escape the mundane realities of coin. Through all these challenges, financial, diplomatic, and administrative, Jaime persevered. Day by day, the city's morale rose. Buildings were repaired, new shops opened, and the once ravaged throne room was slowly renovated, though Jaime refused to let them fully restore its old splendor. Too much pomp, he insisted, was a waste of resources. He allowed the workers to mend the shattered pillars and patch the roof, ensuring no more leaks, but the charred stones near the dais were left partially visible, a reminder of the wars that had scarred the city. Some courtiers grumbled that the king was too modest, but others found it oddly inspiring, a testament that the monarchy would not hide from the realm's grim history. As the height of summer approached, the heat became nearly stifling. Courtiers fanned themselves with perfumed cloths, and knights removed as much armor as they dared. Jaime often chose light garments of linen, eschewing the heavy velvets. The gold circlet of a crown he wore only in official ceremonies, preferring a simpler diadem or even no headpiece at all. He felt the weight of it enough without wearing it constantly. Then, on a scorching afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at the gates, a hooded figure traveling with a single donkey cart, claiming to bear news for the king alone. At first, the guards laughed him off, but the traveler produced a small token shaped like a lion's head, which he said would prove his identity. Intrigued, the guards brought the token to the Red Keep. Jaime examined it, a cheap metal trinket but strangely familiar. Suddenly, memory struck him. It was something Tyrion had once carried as a boy before their father forbade him from wearing such nonsense. But how could a stranger possess it? Jaime ordered the traveler admitted under guard. In the throne room's antechamber, the hooded man stepped forward, cowl drawn low. Jaime stood with Brienne and two of his king's guard. "Who are you?" Jaime demanded. "Where did you get that token?" The figure let out a soft chuckle, then reached up and pulled the hood back. Beneath it was a dwarf, his face deeply lined with travel and weariness, but unmistakable. Tyrion Lannister. Jaime's heart lurched so violently he feared it might stop. "Tyrion," he breathed. His brother gave a crooked smile, revealing a scar across his right cheek that Jaime didn't recall. "Hello, brother. I hear you've become king since I left. You do keep busy." Jaime stared, speechless. For a moment, he thought it must be a dream. Tyrion was older, his hair more streaked with gray, his mismatched eyes carrying a heaviness that spoke of many harsh miles. Yet it was truly him. Slowly, Jaime crossed the distance, ignoring the startled guards, and clasped his brother's shoulders. "Gods, Tyrion. I thought you dead or lost forever." Tyrion's grin was tight. "Lost, yes, but not forever, apparently." He glanced around at the ornate hall, the flicker of torches. "A warm welcome indeed. Are you going to have me arrested this time, or is fratricide off the menu these days?" Jaime winced, remembering how they had parted, Tyrion fleeing King's Landing after killing their father, Tywin, on the privy. Jaime had helped him escape once, but their relationship had frayed across the events that followed. "No arrests," Jaime said quietly. I'm glad you're alive." Brienne and the guards stood aside, stunned by the dwarf's sudden appearance. Tyrion nodded politely to Brienne. "I see you've risen in the world, sire. Or is it Lord Commander now?" "Congratulations." She gave a slight bow. "Lord Commander, yes. Welcome back, my lord." Her tone was uncertain. Tyrion brushed off the formality. "I'm no lord. Merely a traveler who's grown tired of Essos." He paused, turning back to Jaime. "I have news. Rumors swirl in Volantis of Sellsword companies gathering in the disputed lands, funded by unknown benefactors who whisper of conquering Westeros. I suspect the Iron Bank might have a hand in it, or some exiled Targaryen loyalists. I heard enough that I decided to see if my dear brother still lived, and if so, whether he'd want a warning." Jaime felt a chill despite the summer heat. "Another threat from Essos? You've come a long way to deliver such news. Could it be just talk?" Tyrion shrugged. "It could. But after the fiasco with Daenerys, some in Essos still harbor illusions of retaking Westeros or establishing a new empire. If there's coin to hire Sellswords, you can bet someone will try. Best to prepare in case they come knocking." Jaime nodded grimly. "Thank you for telling me." He studied Tyrion's face, reading the fatigue and guarded hope. "You'll stay here, at least for a time? We have much to discuss, and I'd have you safe under my protection." Tyrion's brow quirked. "Protection, indeed. From who?" "My own ghosts." But the wry edge in his voice softened. "Truth be told, I'm tired of running. If you'll have me, I'll remain for a while. I'd like a hot meal, a decent bed, and perhaps a chance to speak with you more privately." Jaime placed a hand on Tyrion's shoulder again, this time gently. "I'll arrange it." He turned to Brienne. "Lord Commander, please see to it that Lord Tyrion is given suitable quarters and that the kitchens prepare something other than gruel." She inclined her head, beckoning Tyrion to follow. He paused before departing, looking up at Jaime. For an instant, their gazes locked, thick with memories of laughter and betrayal, of paternal scorn and sibling bonds. Then Tyrion managed a half-smile and strode away. That night, Jaime did not sleep until he and Tyrion had sat in private for hours, talking by candlelight. In a small solar overlooking the city, they shared a modest feast: roast duck, fresh bread, a cask of ale. Tyrion tore into the food with a hunger clearly born of long travels. Between bites, he recounted pieces of his journey: stints in Volantis, Pentos, and Lys, involvement in shady negotiations with mercenaries, attempts to keep a low profile while the name Lannister was reviled in half the world. He had avoided political entanglements as much as he could, he claimed, though he'd gleaned plenty of rumors. Jaime listened, sometimes interrupting with questions. "Did you ever hear what became of Daenerys's last dragon?" he asked at one point. Tyrion shook his head. "Vanished. Some say it flew east to the Shadowlands. Others claim it was killed by hunters in the Red Waste. No one truly knows. But the Targaryen dream of conquest died with her, or so it seemed." Jaime Fr. "Owned." Yet you speak of new Sellsword threats? Tyrion sipped ale, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Ambition never dies, Jaime. There's always someone who fancies themselves a savior or a conqueror. If they find enough gold, they'll try. Silence fell. Jaime studied his brother, recalling how once he had saved Tyrion from a death sentence only for Tyrion to murder their father and vanish. What about that night? Jaime asked quietly, unable to hold back. When you killed him? Tyrion's expression closed. I don't expect forgiveness. I know how you idolized Tywin, even if he was a tyrant to both of us. I'd reached my breaking point. Jaime closed his eyes briefly. He was not a good father, he admitted. I've learned enough to see that now. Doesn't make his death any less shocking. But he hesitated. I suppose I've come to terms with it, in a way. He shaped us into weapons of his own ambition. You escaped that mold by doing the unthinkable. In some twisted sense, I envy you. Tyrion gave a bitter laugh. There's no envy to be had. I lived haunted by it. But if you've made your peace, then perhaps, well, that's enough for me. They fell quiet again, the torches guttering. At length, Jaime spoke of his own burdens, inheriting a broken kingdom, trying to unify the pieces, the rebellions quashed, the fragile peace sustained by compromise and vigilance. Tyrion listened intently, occasionally interjecting with a sardonic comment or a wry grin. It felt oddly comforting, like slipping back into an old rhythm, the one tempered by age and pain. At last, when the candles had burned low, Tyrion stretched and yawned. I'm glad you're still alive, brother. Even more surprised you're actually doing a decent job at ruling. Perhaps the gods do have a sense of humor. Jaime smiled, a faint, genuine curve of his lips. Thank you for coming back. We'll figure out what to do about these rumors of Sellsword armies. Tyrion nodded. Tomorrow. Tonight, I sleep. In a real bed with no fleas or suspicious lumps. He rose, gave Jaime a curt bow that was half joking, and left. Alone in the dim solar, Jaime felt an unfamiliar sense of relief mingled with trepidation. Tyrion was back, which might bring complexities. But it also brought a glimmer of hope, as if a missing piece of Jaime's life had returned. Perhaps, with Tyrion's cunning and knowledge of Essos, they could preempt any new threats. Or at the least, face them together. The next day, Jaime introduced Tyrion formally to the council, ignoring the quiet murmurs that flared at the sight of the infamous kinslayer who had fled the city after Tywin's murder. Ser Davos, ever diplomatic, offered a reserved nod, while Yohn Royce maintained a frosty politeness. The Tarly scion eyed Tyrion with suspicion but said nothing overtly hostile. Tyrion, for his part, kept his usual flippant tongue in check, showing uncharacteristic tact. He explained, in measured tones, what he had gleaned of the Sellsword Company's stirring in Essos. The group included the Golden Company, much reduced since their last foray into Westeros, and several lesser bands. Their patron or patrons remained anonymous, but the scale of rumored recruitment suggested someone with deep pockets. So the question, Tyrion concluded, leaning on a cane he now carried for a slight limp, is whether they truly intend to sail here, or if it's all a bluff to extort money from gullible exiles and lords. My instincts say the threat is at least partly real. Where there's coin, Sellswords follow. Royce grunted. If we have no name, how do we prepare? Tyrion cocked his head. By strengthening our fleet, for one. If these armies come, they must cross the narrow sea. We also ensure our alliances on the eastern coast are secure, Dragonstone, the Vale, even the Stormlands, so they can respond swiftly. Jaime nodded thoughtfully. We should also re-establish a network of informants in Essos. We've neglected that since Varys' time, for better or worse. Davos sighed. And who will manage that? We lack a master of whispers. A silence fell. Jaime glanced at Tyrion. He recalled how cunning his brother could be, how deftly Tyrion had once maneuvered in King's Landing under Joffrey's nose. But after all that had passed, was Tyrion suited, or even willing, to take on such a role? Tyrion must have read the thought in Jaime's eyes. The dwarf shrugged. If you're implying I do it, I'm flattered, but I'm no spider. I have connections, yes, but also many enemies in Essos. My presence might cause more complications than solutions. Still, I can advise whomever you choose. Jaime massaged his temple. We'll discuss it further. For now, let's focus on fortifying our navy. The Redwine fleet from the Arbor might be a key ally if we can negotiate terms. And so the council spun into deliberation, planning for a potential threat across the sea. Messages were dispatched to the Arbor, to Storm's End, to the Vale, urging them to bolster their fleets. King's Landing began refitting ships in the harbor, hiring shipwrights to build new galleys. Jaime found it eerily familiar, preparing for an invasion even as the city around him carried on with daily life. It seemed war might come again, or perhaps it would fizzle if the mysterious benefactor's gold ran out. Meanwhile, Tyrion settled into a routine at the keep, occasionally offering his insights in council but mostly engaging in quiet research with the Archmaester from the Citadel. He roamed the city's taverns, gleaning rumors. Jaime sometimes joined him for a late-night cup of wine, exchanging banter that felt like a small return to brotherhood. Though an undercurrent of tension remained, so much had happened that could not be undone, they made the best of the present. One sweltering evening, as Jaime relaxed in the solar with a goblet of cooled wine, Tyrion strode in, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's hotter than the seven hells out there. I forgot how King's Landing becomes a furnace in high summer." Jaime chuckled. "Better than freezing in the north, I suppose." Tyrion snorted. "Debatable." He accepted a goblet from a servant and took a generous swig. "I've been meaning to ask, do you truly intend to hold the throne for life? Or do you plan to name an heir and vanish into the sunset one day? Royalty doesn't seem your style, even now." Jaime paused, swirling the wine. The question stung more than he cared to admit. He had no heirs, his children with Cersei were all gone. In the eyes of the realm, Tommen and Myrcella had been Baratheons anyway. He had never publicly acknowledged them. And now there was no one left of that line. I haven't decided," he admitted. "I never wanted to be king. But the realm needed someone to step up. If I abdicate tomorrow, we risk another power vacuum. Maybe one day, if the realm is stable enough, I can convene the lords to select a successor." Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps a more democratic approach like the Night's Watch or the Ironborn Kingsmoot. That would be quite the novelty for Westeros." Jaime's lips twitched. "We'll see. For now, my duty is to keep the peace." Tyrion studied him. "And what of your personal life? You can't claim celibacy like the King's Guard. People will expect you to marry eventually to secure the succession." Jaime stiffened, an involuntary flicker of emotion crossing his face. Marriage. The notion felt hollow. Once his entire world had revolved around Cersei. That had ended in ruin. The only woman who stirred anything in him now was Brienne, and that was a tangled knot of conflicting feelings. He could hardly imagine the realm accepting their union, he a king, she a sworn knight of his King's Guard. And he himself wasn't sure if such a thing would be right. "I doubt the realm wants a one-handed old lion for a bridegroom," he said, deflecting. Tyrion pursed his lips. "You're not that old, dear brother. And you're hardly undesirable from a political standpoint. But I won't press the matter. Just know that gossip will swirl if you stay unmarried indefinitely." Jaime gave a noncommittal shrug. "Let them gossip. I've been the subject of worse." Time moved on. Summer nights brought festivals to King's Landing, including a harvest fair that saw farmers from the Reach displaying their produce in the city squares. Jaime attended discreetly, letting the small folk see their king in simpler attire, sampling honey cakes and buying trifling trinkets from the vendors. Brienne accompanied him in plain clothes, though her size and bearing still drew stares. Tyrion tagged along too, eager to observe the city's vibrancy. They listened to street minstrels, watched jugglers, and heard the laughter of children who, for once, grew up without bombs of wildfire overhead or the threat of rampaging armies. Jaime felt a small measure of pride. If nothing else, he had helped create a space where people could smile again. But beyond the city walls, the world did not stand still. Reports trickled in from the narrow sea. Strange galleys had been sighted, carrying the banners of unknown sells-word companies. Some spoke of gold-laden caravans and pentos, possibly preparing to finance a crossing. Others suggested it was all rumor inflated by pirates. Jaime ordered more patrols, refusing to be caught off guard. Tension simmered in the capital. Whispers of a possible invasion rippled through dockside taverns. One morning, a battered Lycian merchant ship limped into the harbor, its captain seeking an audience with the king. In the throne room, the man knelt before Jaime, recounting a harrowing tale of being accosted by raiders wearing no standard who demanded tribute in the name of a new claimant to Westeros. The captain claimed these raiders spoke of a Silver King waiting across the sea. Jaime frowned. Another pretender? He hoped it was mere bluff. But combined with Tyrion's warnings, it was too concerning to ignore. The council deliberated. Jon Royce advocated a show of strength, sending a contingent of warships to Essos to disrupt any mustering of sellswords before they could sail. Ser Davos was more cautious, pointing out that attacking foreign ports without clear proof of aggression might provoke tensions with free cities not involved in the plot. Tyrion offered a middle path, dispatch official envoys to Pentos, Myr, and Lys to investigate the rumors while quietly stationing more royal ships near Dragonstone to watch for any large-scale crossing. Jaime agreed to the middle course. He named 3 envoys, one for each city, each accompanied by loyal knights, to gather intelligence. He gave them authority to negotiate limited trade pacts if that might open doors for information. Meanwhile, the royal fleet near Dragonstone was bolstered under an experienced admiral from the Stormlands. After the war with Daenerys, King's Landing had seized several captured ships. They were refurbished and crewed by hardened sailors who had survived multiple wars. Jaime wrote to the Vale, the Reach, and Dorne, urging them to keep watch on their coasts as well. Summer wore on. The tension weighed on Jaime, who had hoped the realm would know lasting peace. Now, a shadow loomed from across the sea. Every morning, he reviewed new reports from the envoys, growing more frustrated by the lack of conclusive evidence. The free cities were rife with rumor. The Sellsword companies were indeed recruiting, but for what purpose remained unclear. Some named an exiled Blackfyre descendant, though the Blackfyre line was thought long extinct. Others whispered of a lost Targaryen propped up by wealthy magisters. Or it could be nothing more than mercenary lords seeking to carve out territory in Slaver's Bay. Jaime's envoys could not confirm which was true. In the midst of this uncertainty, daily governance continued. Taxes had to be collected, disputes settled, roads maintained. Tyrion lent a hand in the administrative tangle, proving once again that his mind was sharp. Some courtiers gradually warmed to him, though others never forgot that he had once murdered the patriarch of House Lannister. Jaime considered naming Tyrion to the council officially, perhaps as Master of Whispers or Master of Coin. But he hesitated, unsure if the realm was ready, unsure if Tyrion was ready. One sweltering afternoon, Jaime found himself alone with Tyrion in the library, scanning a map of the eastern seas. Dust motes danced in the sunlight from high windows. Tyrion traced a route with his finger. If an invasion force sets sail from Myr or Lys, they might aim for the Stormlands or Dorne first. The narrower crossing from the disputed lands to Westeros, it's a logical path. Jaime nodded. We have watchers in the Stepstones, but the area is riddled with pirate dens. They might slip past if they're clever. Tyrion sighed, closing his eyes a moment. Or again. You've done well to give Westeros this reprieve, Jaime. It pains me to think some phantom pretender might ruin it all. Jaime let out a low breath. I know, but I'll face it if I must. Better we see it coming than be caught unawares. He touched Tyrion's arm lightly. Thank you truly for warning us. Whatever else has passed between us, I'm glad we have this chance. Tyrion's gaze flicked to him, some emotion flickering in his mismatched eyes. So am I, he said softly. Then he forced a wry grin. If you'd like to show your gratitude, you can fill my wine cup again tonight. That evening, Jaime and Tyrion did indeed share wine, joined by Brienne for a time. The conversation drifted between banter, old memories, and the new threat. Jaime found himself relaxing in a way he seldom did, exchanging quips with his brother, listening to Brienne's matter-of-fact observations about the City Watch and how it might be mobilized in a crisis. A strange sense of camaraderie hung in the air, as if they were co-conspirators in keeping the realm safe. But the next day, a raven arrived from the Arbor. Corsairs, rumored to be allied with the Sellsword companies, had raided a small coastal village, burning fishing boats and kidnapping locals. The master of ships on the Arbor's council requested urgent help. Fear spread that more attacks might follow. Jaime's jaw clenched as he read the letter. The threat was no longer theoretical. Blood had been spilled. The council gathered intention. Jon Royce argued for an immediate naval expedition to the southwestern seas to hunt down the raiders. Davos urged caution, but ultimately they agreed that a demonstration of force was necessary. Jaime authorized a detachment of the royal fleet to sail from Dragonstone and join with Arbor ships to track the Corsairs. Word was sent to Dorne as well, urging them to bolster patrols near the Red Mountains. The Watchers in the Stepstones would stay vigilant for any large-scale movement. Days passed in a flurry of dispatches, supply gathering, and coordination with allied lords. Jaime supervised personally, feeling a knot of dread tightening in his gut. Another war might loom. He considered riding out to the Arbor himself, but Tyrion advised against it, pointing out that the king's presence in the capital was crucial for overall coordination. Jaime relented. Instead, he placed a trusted bannerman, Lord Oakhart, a Stormlander knight with a history of naval command, in charge of the expedition. As the ships set sail, the city buzzed with rumors. The smallfolk prayed this wouldn't spark a full-blown conflict. Jaime tried to reassure them through public statements, urging calm. But privately, he couldn't shake the sense of gathering storm clouds on the horizon. So much for the realm's respite. If a new invasion was truly in the offing, they would soon be tested as never before. In the midst of this turmoil, the Archmaester Helman, concluding his historical chronicle, requested a final audience with Jaime. They met in a quiet chamber one morning, Helman wearing his many-linked chain over plain robes. He thanked Jaime for his cooperation and mentioned that the chronicle would likely be titled The War of Many Kings and the Rebuilding of the Realm. Jaime felt a twinge of unease at being immortalized in writing, but Helmon insisted future generations should know how the realm had survived. Then the old scholar hesitated. "Your Grace, if I may be bold, how would you describe your reign thus far?" Jaime stared at him. "Uneasy, yet necessary. I did not want to be king, but I chose to do what I must. I'm not sure history cares about my desires." Helmon nodded, scribbling. History often forgets the personal motives of monarchs. Yet it's precisely the humanity which shapes a reign. "Thank you, Your Grace." With that, Helmon departed, leaving Jaime to ponder the question. How did he describe his reign? He had inherited a broken kingdom, bound it with compromise and grit, faced a rebellion at home, and might now face an invasion from abroad. He had spilled blood, tried to show mercy, and struggled with the ghosts of his past. He had surrounded himself with people who believed in a better Westeros, forging alliances among former enemies. He had done all he could to avoid the mistakes that once stained the name of Lannister. And still, it might not be enough. The realm's future was uncertain. Yet he would not abandon hope. From the vantage of the Iron Throne, he had seen the realm's worst face: ambition, betrayal, cruelty. But he had also glimpsed bravery, loyalty, and a willingness in the people to follow a king who strove for justice rather than tyranny. Perhaps that was reason enough to press on. Summer's heat kept intensifying, as if the sun itself conspired to test the city's patience. The beaches along the Blackwater turned golden under relentless light. Merchants hawked iced wine and chilled fruits to those who could afford a taste of relief. Jaime spent more time in the evening hours on the battlements or the gardens, seeking a breeze. Often, Brienne accompanied him on these walks, discussing security matters or simply sharing quiet moments of reflection. Tyrion, meanwhile, pressed on with investigating rumors from Essos. He engaged with foreign merchants in King's Landing, gleaning scraps of information about corsairs and Sells-word recruitment. He reported daily to Jaime, who listened carefully, forming contingency plans. The picture that emerged suggested that while some raids might continue, a full invasion was not yet imminent. Someone was still gathering gold and men, uncertain if they'd have enough might to challenge the entire realm. That gave Jaime a window to reinforce alliances, to prepare the fleets. The tension remained, but it felt less like a hammer about to strike and more like a slow fuse burning. In this lull, Jaime's personal burdens weighed on him anew. He knew the lords would soon clamor for a formal announcement of succession or a royal marriage. Whispers abounded that the king's line would die with him. Davos raised it gently in council. "Your Grace, the realm is uneasy if they believe no heir exists. Even a named successor, not of your blood, might suffice." Jaime put him off, citing the immediate crisis. But he knew the question wouldn't vanish. One evening, while strolling through the Godwood with Brienne, he found himself blurting, "The lords want me wed." She paused, the torchlight playing across her earnest features. "They always do. Monarchs are expected to secure heirs." He ran his fingers through his hair. "I have no heirs. And I see no point in forging a loveless match just to breed a child. The realm might demand it, but I can't stomach it. Not after everything." She was silent for a beat. "What do you want?" His gaze lifted to her. The question echoed with layers of meaning. "I want," he trailed off. "I'm not Sue. I should say." Her eyes flickered with understanding. "Jaime," she began softly, but he shook his head, stepping closer. "Life has been a series of wars, regrets, and half-choices," he murmured. "Yet here we are, Brienne. If I could just," but he hesitated, the unspoken longing hanging between them. He recalled how she was sworn to protect him, how she wore a white cloak that symbolized chastity and devotion to duty. He was the king, burdened by a realm's expectations. Could they break those barriers? Should they? She inhaled, clearly wrestling with her own feelings. "Some lines are not easily crossed," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I'm your king's guard, and I'm not." He placed his golden hand gently over her wrist. "You're Brienne," he said, voice thick. "The only person in this entire realm I trust without question. The only one who's seen me at my worst and still stands by me." She swallowed. "That was my duty. And more than duty, I think." He let the hush linger, seeing the shine of unshed emotion in her eyes. "I do want to break these lines, Brienne," he admitted at last. "But not if it means diminishing who you are. I won't lock you in a role you never wanted. I won't force you into a queen's gown or any nonsense like that. The realm might demand an heir from me, but they have no right to command my heart." Tears shimmered at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them away, jaw tight. "You're the king," she managed. "Your decisions affect so many. If we gave in to any, she faltered. Would that help the realm or harm it? Would people question your honor?" He let out a shaking breath. "When have people not questioned my honor?" Let them talk. I only know I don't want to face the next storm alone. He paused, the tension in his chest nearly overwhelming. But I'll leave it in your hands. If you say no, I'll abide by it. You're too important to me to let desire ruin your place. Brienne closed her eyes, composure wavering. The torches flickered, casting shifting shadows across her strong features. At length, she drew a ragged breath. Jaime, I've never felt worthy of such things. But you've changed that in ways I can't explain. A tremulous smile touched her lips. Yet I am a knight, sworn to serve, sworn to the king guard. That oath forbids me from. She looked away, pained. He nodded, heart-twisting. The White Cloak's vow was explicit. No marriage, no children, absolute devotion to the king's protection. He had once sneered at such vows while betting his own sister, an irony that cut him now. He had become the king she guarded, and the vow trapped them both in an impossible bind. I understand, he whispered. I won't press you. Forgive me for burdening you with this. Before she could respond, a rustling sounded behind them. A page hurried into the godwood, breathless. Your Grace, urgent message from the harbor. One of our scouting vessels has returned, bearing news from the southwest. You're needed in the war council. Jaime and Brienne broke apart, the moment shattered. She swallowed hard, cheeks flushed, then turned to the page. Lead us, she said, her tone reverting to the crisp command of the Lord Commander. Jaime followed, turmoil roiling inside him. Duty, always overshadowing whatever remnants of personal choice he had left. He steadied himself, banishing the raw emotion. If the realm was indeed in peril, he had no time to dwell on his own yearnings. The realm came first. It always had to. In the council chamber, the gathered lords waited, tension crackling in the torchlight. Tyrion stood near the head of the table, scanning a parchment. Davos, Royce, and the Tarly scion looked grim. As soon as Jaime entered, Tyrion cleared his throat. We have confirmation from our scouting ship near the arbor. The corsairs that raided that fishing village have regrouped with more vessels. Their flying banners rumored to be associated with the Golden Company, though not definitively. Word is they plan to strike the Arbor's coast again, and the Arbor's council begs for immediate reinforcements. Jaime's jaw set. The expedition we sent, Lord Oakhart, did he engage them? Davos sighed. His fleet engaged a small group of raiders, sank a few ships, but the main body slipped away. Now they're massing anew. We need a stronger presence, or the Arbor could suffer heavy losses. Royce drummed his fingers on the table. If the Arbor falls under repeated attack, our wine and trade from that region could be cut off, not to mention the blow to morale. The realm will see that the king can't defend his own coasts. Jaime looked at Tyrion. What do you suggest? Tyrion shrugged. Send a larger fleet, perhaps led by someone of higher rank. Show them we won't tolerate piracy. If these raiders are indeed a vanguard for a bigger invasion, better to confront them now before they establish a foothold. Jaime nodded. Then we do just that. I'll order half our royal fleet to sail south, join forces with the Arbor, and scour the seas for these raiders. If the Golden Company is behind this, we need to root them out. He paused, a thought striking him. I'll lead them myself. Protests rose immediately. Davos shook his head vehemently. Your Grace, it's too risky. If you're at sea and something goes awry, the realm is left vulnerable. Let someone else command. Jaime's eyes narrowed. I left the last naval expedition to Oakhart and it wasn't enough. We can't risk half measures now. The lords must see the king is serious about protecting his people. Besides, I have capable counselors to manage the city in my absence. Tyrion glanced at Jaime, concern evident. You're not exactly known for your naval expertise, brother. Jaime let out a rueful chuckle. I'm aware. But I've learned from the last few wars how crucial it is to lead from the front, to show confidence. If these raiders see the king's banner on the horizon, maybe they'll think twice. Brienne, standing near the door, stepped forward. If you go, I will be at your side, she said firmly, ignoring the flicker of unspoken tension between them from moments before. Jaime inclined his head, grateful for her unwavering support. He looked at the council. Finalize the details. In 3 days, I'll set sail with the royal fleet. Ser Davos, I want you to remain as hand in the capital. Tyrion, assist him in any negotiations with foreign envoys. Royce, keep the city watch alert. Tarly, manage inland defenses in case there's any diversionary attack. Agreed. Though some still looked uneasy, they inclined their heads. The plan was set. Jaime felt a surge of steeled resolve. If he could eliminate the threat at sea, the realm might avoid a broader war. That was worth any personal risk. The next days passed in a flurry of preparations, gathering ships, men, supplies, and arms. Word spread quickly that the king himself would lead the fleet, rallying the capital to frantic activity. On the appointed morning, the harbor bustled at dawn, gulls screaming overhead, sails snapping in the breeze. Jaime arrived with Brienne and a retinue of knights, each wearing simplified armor suitable for sea combat. He wore a breastplate emblazoned with a golden lion's head, though not the full regalia of a coronation. The golden hand shone in the early light, a reminder of past battles. Tyrion and Davos came to see him off, standing on the docks. Davos clasped Jaime's good hand. "Good luck, your grace. May the Seven guide your ship. We'll keep the city safe." Tyrion gave his brother a long, measured look. "Try not to sink, Jaime. We've had enough drowning in our family legacy, wouldn't you say?" Jaime smirked faintly. "I'll do my best." He embraced Tyrion briefly, then turned to board the flagship, a sturdy war galley named the Sea Lion, its prow carved like a roaring lion's head. Brienne followed, her white cloak exchanged for a shorter, more practical mantle. As the royal standard was raised, a golden lion on a crimson field with a small crown above its head, the harbor erupted in cheers and horns. The fleet's sails caught the wind, and one by one they rowed out into the Blackwater Bay. Sunlight glinted on the water, the morning air brisk. Jaime stood at the prow, gazing back at King's Landing receding behind them. No matter how many times he left that city, he never knew if he would return. Yet duty beckoned him onward. The journey south was tense but uneventful at first. The wind favored them, speeding their passage. They stopped briefly at Massey's Hook, exchanging news with local lords. Then they rounded the coast, approaching the waters near the Arbor where they would rendezvous with the Arbor's smaller fleet. Along the way, Brienne walked the decks, ensuring the men kept discipline. Jaime consulted with the ship's captain and the knightly commanders, reviewing potential tactics for sea engagement. Though not an admiral by trade, Jaime understood discipline and strategy, trusting the naval officers to handle the details. On the third day at sea, the watch spotted sails on the horizon. The Arbor's ships flying the grape cluster sigil. They mustered together under a midday sun, exchanging signals by horn. A short parley took place between Jaime's staff and the Arbor's admiral, a stern-faced woman of House Red Wine. She informed them that Corsair sightings had indeed increased. A fishing village had been burned just 2 nights prior, the attackers vanishing before the Arbor's ships could respond. They suspected the raiders might have a hidden cove or island base. Jaime decided to send fast scouts along the coastline, hoping to corner the Corsairs before they could strike again. Over the following days, the combined fleet patrolled the waters vigilantly. Tension simmered as each morning brought fresh rumors of sightings, smoke on the horizon, suspicious sails glimpsed at dusk. Yet the enemy proved elusive. Now and then they found abandoned wrecks or drifting debris, signs of skirmishes that had taken place elsewhere. Frustration mounted among the men. Brienne sensed Jaime's mounting impatience. She often urged him to rest, to trust the officers. Yet he insisted on overseeing search patterns, refusing to let the men believe the king was idle. One dusk, a messenger galley returned with word of a suspicious cove west of a certain cape, a place with rocky shallows perfect for hiding smaller ships. Jaime ordered an immediate heading for that location, setting out under the fading light. Night fell, the sea eerily calm beneath a waning moon. The war galleys rowed quietly, torches doused to maintain stealth. Jaime stood on the quarterdeck beside the captain, scanning the dark horizon. Anxiety prickled in his veins. If the Corsairs lurked there, this could be the confrontation they had come for. If not, they would have wasted precious time. Just before midnight, they rounded a rocky headland. Indeed, a cluster of faint lights flickered near the shoreline, ships at anchor, or so it seemed. Jaime's heart pounded. He gestured for the horns to give the signal to ready arms. The Sea Lion and a handful of other galleys fanned out, oars dipping silently. Then a shout rang from one of the enemy ships. Torches flared, revealing a half-dozen smaller vessels, sails furled, men scrambling on deck. Some banners were black, others had vague insignias, possibly Sellsword insignias or pirate scrawls. Jaime's men shouted in return, horns braying. Suddenly, flaming arrows arced through the night from the Corsair ships, trailing sparks. The battle had begun. "Steady!" Jaime roared, adrenaline coursing. The Sea Lion's archers let fly a barrage, sending the flaming arrows back. At close range, the galleys crashed into the smaller vessels, boarding hooks thrown, men leaping across. The clang of steel and screams shattered the night. Brienne led a group of knights in the first boarding action, her sword reflecting moonlight as she carved through the Corsairs with deadly precision. Jaime oversaw from the main deck, occasionally diving into the fray when a gap needed plugging. His left-handed swordsmanship, though never as graceful as in his youth, was serviceable enough. He parried a wild strike from a shirtless pirate, then ran the man through. Another lunged from behind, only to be skewered by a Lannister guard. Blood splattered the deck, mingling with sea spray. All around, the galleys grappled with enemy ships. Some corsairs tried to flee, hoisting sails in desperation. Arbor vessels cut them off. Flaming pots were hurled, setting enemy decks alight. The stench of burning tar and flesh filled Jaime's nostrils. He forced himself to remain focused. This was the price of duty. He had no illusions about the horror of it. One of the corsair ships, apparently the largest, attempted to break free by ramming its way past the Sea Lion. Jaime shouted for evasive maneuvers. The Sea Lion shifted, but the impact still came with a grinding crash. Men on both ships toppled. The corsair vessel's prow splintered. Jaime barely kept his footing, bracing against the rail. Brienne, down on the lower deck, cursed as she fought to remain upright. "Board them," Jaime commanded, seizing a rope and swinging across a narrow gap to the corsair's deck. Several knights followed, bellowing war cries. The enemy crew, a motley band of sellswords and pirates, rushed to repel them, knives and cutlasses flashing. Jaime parried a slash, golden hand flashing as he blocked a second blow. Another pirate lunged from behind. Jaime pivoted, barely in time, feeling the slice of steel across his shoulder. Pain flared, but he gritted his teeth. Brienne stormed in, cleaving a path through the attackers. They pushed toward the helm, cutting down those who refused to yield. At last, the corsair captain, a scarred man with a brutish face, threw down his weapon. Some of his crew surrendered, others leapt overboard rather than be captured. The deck was slick with gore, the air thick with smoke. Jaime panted, pressing a hand to his shoulder wound. Soon, horns signaled from the other galleys. The enemy was defeated or fleeing. A few smaller ships managed to escape in the darkness, but the majority were captured or sunk. It was a solid victory for Jaime's fleet. As dawn broke, they took stock of the damage. Several royal galleys were badly scorched, but still afloat. The Arbor's ships had fared well. Bodies bobbed in the water, and the stench of death hung heavy. Jaime surveyed the wreckage with a weary heart. They had prevailed, but at the cost of many lives. Among the prisoners was the scarred corsair captain. Jaime questioned him personally under the harsh light of morning, forced to stand on the charred deck of the Sea Lion as the sun rose. The man sneered, spitting blood. "You'll gain nothing from me, Lannister." Jaime's eyes narrowed. "Who hired you? Are you allied with the Golden Company? Is there a pretender funding you?" The corsair laughed bitterly. "We raid. That's all. The sellsword captains pay well for slaves, if you must know. Heard a rumor that some new Targaryen scion wants forced recruits, too, but who can say? If he pays, we sell." He coughed, flecks of red staining his lips. "We're just the first wave, Lannister. This is bigger than me." Jaime felt a chill. "Bigger how?" The captain grinned a broken grin. "You'll see. When the time comes." Then he clamped his mouth shut, refusing further speech. Jaime had him clapped in irons and locked below. Later, after conferring with the Arbor Admiral, he decided to continue patrolling the coast for a time, ensuring no further pockets of corsairs lingered. The short-term threat seemed contained, but the captain's words echoed ominously. A first wave. Another puppet of some hidden master. In the days that followed, the combined fleet launched more sorties, capturing a few scattered pirate boats, though no large force emerged. Finally, with the Arbor secure and the immediate danger past, Jaime prepared to return to King's Landing. He left a portion of the royal fleet behind as reinforcements, ensuring the southwestern coast remained guarded. The Arbor's lords expressed gratitude, toasting the king as a protector. Yet Jaime took no pleasure in the compliments. He sensed that the true danger lay elsewhere, across the sea, gathering strength. The voyage back north was uneventful, marked by calmer seas and an oppressive sense of waiting. Brienne dressed Jaime's shoulder wound daily, scolding him for his recklessness. He bore it stoically, though it throbbed each night. He tried to distract himself by focusing on potential plans to face a larger invasion if it materialized. Each day he consulted with the officers, scribbling notes. When they finally sailed into Blackwater Bay, the city's silhouette rising in the haze, Jaime felt an odd surge of relief. They had staved off the immediate threat. For now, the realm remained safe. At least, until the next wave crashed. Cheers erupted from the docks as the Sea Lion arrived, battered but triumphant. City bells rang, celebrating the victory over the corsairs. Jaime disembarked, flanked by Brienne and a retinue of knights. Tyrion waited on the pier, wearing a half-smile as he clapped politely. Davos too stood by, arms folded, expression betraying relief. Jaime clasped Davos's hand. "All well in the capital?" Davos nodded. "No crises we couldn't handle. Rumors swirl of an invasion, but your success has eased fears for the moment. Welcome home, your grace." Tyrion chimed in, no sign of the bigger players yet, but news of your victory has traveled fast. The realm sees you as a heroic figure, the king who defends the seas. My, how far we've come. Jaime let out a short laugh. I'd rather they not inflate me into a legend. We have enough of those. But let them take comfort if it helps morale. That evening, in the Red Keep, a modest feast was prepared to honor the returning fleet. Jaime tolerated the toasts and applause with a measured politeness. He gave a brief speech praising the bravery of the sailors and knights, then slipped away early, exhausted. Tyrion caught him outside the feast hall, giving him a knowing look. You're not staying to bask in your glory? Tyrion teased gently. Jaime sighed. Glory in war is an illusion. Let them feast. I need rest. Tyrion nodded, patting Jaime's arm. I understand. But do take a moment to reflect on what you've achieved. The realm isn't fully stable, but it's better off than it's been in years. You're making a difference. Jaime mustered a small smile. Thank you. Good night, Tyrion. He retired to his chambers, which had been cleaned and readied. Slipping off his armor, he hissed as the movement tugged on his bandaged shoulder. He poured water into a basin, washing the grime of travel away. Silence enveloped him. The weight of the day sank into his bones. A knock came at the door. He considered ignoring it, but then relented. Enter. Brienne stepped in, carrying fresh bandages. Let me tend your wound, she said quietly. He nodded, sinking onto a bench. She helped remove his tunic, revealing the bandaged gash across his upper arm and shoulder. Carefully, she peeled away the old cloth, cleaning the seeping edges. Her touch was gentle, her brow furrowed in concentration. How bad is it? He asked softly, wincing at the sting of antiseptic. It's healing, though slowly, she replied. You mustn't strain it further if you want a full recovery. He watched her face, half-shadowed by the flickering candle. Memories of their near confession in the godwood swept through him. He let out a shaky breath. Brienne, about what we discussed before we left. She paused, glancing up. The emotion in her eyes mirrored his own uncertainty. Duty called, she murmured. And it still does. You're the king, Jaime. And I'm a knight of your king's guard. He felt a pang, nodding slowly. I know. And if that vow is your choice, I won't speak of it again. His voice caught. I would never force you. She placed a cool hand on his uninjured shoulder, a fleeting caress. I know. And I thank you. But let me think. He opened his mouth to respond, but she shook her head gently, finishing the bandaging with deft fingers. Then she rose, her expression torn. Sleep well, she said softly, and left. Alone, Jaime sank back, feeling a surge of conflicting feelings. On the battlefield, he could make split-second decisions with clarity. Yet here, in the realm of the heart, he felt utterly at sea. He reminded himself that the realm's safety was paramount, that his personal desires must yield if they threatened stability. Yet a part of him yearned for the warmth Brienne offered, a chance at genuine companionship. Could he not have both? The realm did not revolve around an archaic vow, and perhaps neither did she. But the path forward remained clouded by centuries of tradition and duty. Days slipped into weeks. Jaime resumed the rhythms of rule, instructing the fleet to remain vigilant in the southwestern seas, working with Tyrion to gather intelligence from Essos and reinforcing alliances with lords near the coast. The Corsair threat subsided somewhat. No large-scale invasion materialized, at least not yet. Summer's heat began to fade, hinting at autumn. The capital breathed easier, convinced that the rumored Targaryen or Blackfyre scion might be mere myth. Jaime remained cautious. He had Brienne intensify training among the city watch, ensuring the men could handle any sudden unrest. He quietly stored wildfire caches in safe vaults, a grim reminder of Aerys' madness, but potentially a last resort if an invading army landed at the gates. He disliked the idea, but he would not be caught unprepared. On a crisp evening near the end of summer, he once again found himself in the godwood, leaning against the heart tree. Moonlight dappled the grass, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of autumn leaves. He closed his eyes, listening to his own heartbeat, wondering if the realm might yet enjoy a full year of peace. Then came the soft sound of footsteps. Brienne. She stood a few paces away, the white of her cloak faintly visible in the moonlight. He straightened, heart pounding. My lady, he said quietly. She stepped closer. I've thought about it, Jaime. About the vow and about us. Her voice trembled slightly. He swallowed hard. And what have you decided? She looked at him, eyes reflecting moonlight. I swore to protect you and serve the realm. That oath is sacred to me. But I realize now that it doesn't forbid me from caring for you or even being with you if that's what we both choose. The vow of the King's Guard about marriage and children. It's meant to prevent divided loyalties. But my loyalty isn't divided. It's unwavering to you in every sense. He felt a rush of emotion. Brienne, are you certain? The realm may frown on such a union. They expect me to wed for alliances to produce heirs. You've seen how they gossip. Her chin lifted, a determined set to her jaw. Let them gossip. I have never cared for their opinions. You're my king. And also, you're Jaime. If you want me beside you in every way, I choose to stand there. He stepped forward, tentatively placing his golden hand along her cheek, the metal cool against her warm skin. I do want that, he whispered. I've wanted it for longer than I dared admit. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. Slowly, he drew her into a gentle, hesitant kiss, lips meeting in the moonlit stillness. The weight of the realm, the burden of tradition, all seemed to fade in that moment. They parted, breathing softly. How does this change the future? She asked, voice barely above a murmur. He held her gaze. I don't know, but we'll face it together. If the lords demand I wed, I'll tell them I have what I need. If they threaten rebellion, I'll defy them. I've done it before. The realm can survive without my heirs. Cannot survive without you and me standing as we are, honest, steadfast. They may call us fools, but I'd rather be a fool than a liar. She gave a small, trembling smile. Then I will remain in your Kingsguard, your companion in arms, and in heart as well. Jaime exhaled, relief and warmth flooding him. He pressed his forehead to hers, the hush of the gods would holding them like a sanctuary. If war came again, if the realm demanded more of him, he would face it. But at least he would not face it alone. In the distance, the city lights glimmered. History might recall Jaime Lannister as the Kingslayer, the reluctant king who inherited a broken realm. But in that moonlit moment, he was simply a man who had at last found someone to stand beside him. The final shape of his reign remained uncertain. Threats could still descend from across the sea. Old grudges might flare again, and new challenges would arise with every season. Yet for now, in the quiet of the Godswood, Jaime Lannister allowed himself a rare moment of contentment. He had sought to break the cycle of blood and fear, to guide the realm toward something better. And here, in Brienne's presence, he felt a glimmer of belief that redemption, once so distant, might truly be within his grasp. No one could know the future. The realm might still face storms. But for the moment, Jaime found peace in the only certainty he had. He was not alone, and as long as he drew breath, he would fight for a kingdom free from the horrors that once shaped him. If he was to be the last king standing, he would make that stand a beacon, not a shadow. He pressed a kiss to Brienne's forehead, and together they turned to leave the Godwood, ready to face whatever dawn awaited the realm they had fought so long to save.